Chapter 1250. I'm here. Peaky Eye seemed to have thought of something and replied excitedly. This general will give you 30,000 elite cavalrymen. I want you to take them and launch a fierce attack on the first army. The main army will arrive soon. Do you have the confidence to open a gap and join up with General Alefu? After thinking it over, Beaumeur still decided to send 30,000 troops. In his opinion, if he sent too few, it would be difficult to break through the enemy's defense line. If he sent too many, he might be in danger if something unexpected happened. Thus, 30,000 was suitable. Finally, he could lead his troops to fight the five-star army. Peaky Eye was naturally excited and replied happily, "Please rest assured, General. I will not disappoint you." "Very good. Go ahead." After giving Peaky Eye a look of praise, Beaumeur immediately gave the order. Other than the 5,000 cavalrymen who were at the back, the rest of the cavalrymen were ready to attack at any time to support Peaky Eye and take down the new army. Yi Erqiang's 10,000 cavalrymen were already in formation under General Alefu's lead. Strong bows were held in their hands, and they were 5 miles away. Alefu, who was in heavy armor, looked forward with a slightly anxious gaze. He didn't know if the scouts he sent to inform the Walla army had completed their mission. If not, he didn't have much confidence in holding on for long with his 10,000 cavalrymen. Unknowingly, the sky had turned gloomy once again. Snowflakes drifted down. Alefu reached out his right hand to catch a snowflake as a look of surprise flashed across his eyes. It's snowing heavily. Then, the snow filled the sky and filled the space in a very short time. For a moment, even the line of sight was blocked. This made Alefu's heart sink involuntarily. Obstructed vision was not a good thing for long-range archers. Unable to accurately lock onto the target, Alefu cursed the heavens for not opening their eyes. How could it snow so heavily at this time? But at the same time, he couldn't help but raise his spirits and give orders to the cavalrymen. "Everyone, don't shoot blindly. You must aim before shooting. Even if you can only shoot one arrow, you must hit the target." Usually, when facing a cavalry charge from afar, considering the distance, most archers would only shoot 2 arrows unless they had extremely fast hand speed and could shoot 3 or 4 arrows. However, due to the heavy snow, it was much more difficult to pinpoint the target's position. Alefu had no choice but to shoot an arrow to pinpoint the target's location. The wait was long, yet it also seemed to be over in the blink of an eye. Not long after the Yerkiang cavalry got into formation, rumbling sounds came from the distance. Then, more and more black figures appeared in their line of sight. Alefu's gaze couldn't help but tighten as his left hand tightly gripped the scabbard of his saber. At that moment, Alefu was not the only one who was extremely nervous. The 10,000 cavalrymen beside him were also very nervous. Although they couldn't estimate how many enemies were charging towards them due to the heavy snow, their intuition told them that there were quite a number of enemy riders, at least far more than they had. "Prepare to fire." Some of the Kiliarchs and generals standing in the middle of the army shouted, causing the already tense atmosphere to become even more tense. "Kill!" The cavalry of the new army approached from afar. The commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Bai Kai, held a sharp saber in his hand as he constantly shouted. Under his lead, the 8,400 men of the 2nd Cavalry Division charged from the front. Almost at the same time, the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, Lei Chuandang, also gave the order to charge. On the right, the commander of the 4th Cavalry Division, Chang Bo, didn't want to fall behind and led the entire division forward. More than 20,000 cavalrymen, more than twice the number of the Yerkiang cavalry. Their momentum soared and their morale was high. "Don't be afraid." Sensing this monstrous battle intent, Alefu used his own shout to stabilize the army. "Vala's 100,000 cavalrymen are converging with us. As long as we can stop their charge, it will be time for us to launch a pincer attack from both sides. Brothers, great merit is in front of us. Fire!" The more Alefu shouted, the more excited he became. Through the shout, he seemed to be able to motivate himself. Following the last shout, tens of thousands of arrows flew across the sky, flying toward the charging cavalrymen of the 3 armies. Ding, ding, dang, dang. Ding, dang, ding, ding. Arrows filled the sky, falling on top of the 2nd Cavalry Division along with the snowflakes. What followed was a wave of sabers swinging and all sorts of clashing sounds. Under the almost indiscriminate attack, there would always be 5-star army cavalrymen falling from their horses. Under such a wide range of arrows, blocking and dodging became very limited. Fortunately, the new army, under the leadership of Suhi, paid a lot of attention to archery training. When they saw the sky covering arrows flying towards them, most of the cavalrymen leaped to the sides of their horses, minimizing the losses. The distance of 100 meters was covered in less than 10 breaths for the cavalrymen. Using this opportunity, the Yirkiang cavalrymen had already cleared the front line and gathered together like an iron bucket. Facing the enemy's superior numbers, Aleifu didn't choose to meet force with force. Instead, he used the cavalrymen as a tortoise shell, forming a human wall to defend. 10,000 cavalrymen, endless and boundless. This wasn't just for show. If one didn't see it with their own eyes, it was hard to imagine how magnificent and terrifying 10,000 cavalrymen would be. If such an army was to be killed one by one, who knew how long it would take? The best method was to directly destroy their fighting spirit and make them flee in all directions. This was the best way to resolve the battle. Usually, when the 5-star army was facing an enemy, the most habitual way of fighting was to split the enemy up and then find the place where the main general was. After that, they would launch the fiercest attack, either killing the enemy general or scaring the enemy general away. Whichever one of them was chosen, they would win. But now, Aleifu was holed up in the human wall, making it impossible for the 3 cavalry divisions to find him in a short period of time. This also achieved the effect of capturing the leader first. Aleifu's strategy was very brilliant. He first protected his own safety so that the army wouldn't fall into chaos. Then, he used the wall of cavalry as an excuse to build up the confidence of everyone. With a cohesive heart and hope, such an army would not be easily defeated. At the very least, it wouldn't be resolved in a short time. In the blink of an eye, an hour had passed, and the 3 cavalry divisions had only managed to wipe out 2,000 or so cavalrymen on the outer perimeter. This rate of attrition made the 3 cavalry division commanders extremely anxious, but there was nothing they could do. Continue to charge. Stop using arrows and arrows. Use bows and arrows to attack and close the distance. Try to open an opening as soon as possible. 2nd Cavalry Division Commander Bai Kai thought that at this time, 1st Cavalry Division Commander Kalu was about to face the wall of cavalry's charge. He immediately felt a huge pressure on his body. In fact, Commander Kalu had already seen the 30,000 cavalrymen led by Tai Chin. Moreover, both sides are already fighting. This time, after receiving the order, the 30,000 cavalrymen did not stop for a single moment, using their fastest speed to appear in front of the 1st Cavalry Division's front lines. Their only thought was to render a great contribution. This time, after receiving the order, the 30,000 cavalrymen did not stop for a single moment, using their fastest speed to appear in front of the 1st Cavalry Division's front lines. Then, relying on their advantage in numbers, they launched an earth-shattering charge. Arrows were shot from afar. After 2 rounds of arrows, at least 1,000 cavalrymen were killed or injured. Kalu pulled out his cavalry sword and no longer defended. Instead, he changed to a frontal assault, not defending and counterattacking. This was the method Kalu prepared for the enemy. He wanted to catch the enemy off guard. He wanted to catch them off guard. Of the 8,400 cavalry warriors, apart from the 3,400 who continued to harass the enemy with arrows, the other 5,000 cavalrymen followed him and counterattacked with arrows. When they charged into the enemy's camp, Tai Chin, who was waiting to see the 5-star army's performance, couldn't help but widen his eyes at this moment. On the way here, Tikian had thought about whether his sudden appearance would catch the other side off guard, or whether the other side had already prepared for it. For example, if the other side had already prepared something like a barricade or an iron caltrop, and how to deal with the next situation, using the smallest price to obtain the greatest victory, and so on. However, when he arrived, he didn't see the 1st Cavalry Division preparing anything. He didn't even see the most basic of obstacles. This made him happy. He thought that he was fast enough and took advantage of the time difference. This way, he was even more confident. With 30,000 men against less than 10,000 cavalrymen, wouldn't it be easy? It could be said that Tai Chi had made several preparations. He was just waiting for the enemy to make a move. But what he didn't expect was that the enemy would actually counterattack. This greatly exceeded his expectations. Many of the cavalrymen charging at the front didn't expect this either. When Kalu led his 5,000 cavalrymen to charge, there were still many Walla cavalrymen who were crouching on the sides of their horses or under their horses, making tactical movements to avoid the arrows. Unexpectedly, the enemy cavalry appeared beside them. Caught off guard, many soldiers didn't even have a chance to raise their swords before they were killed by the approaching cavalry of the 5-star army. In a short period of time, at least 600 cavalrymen were killed in a single clash, and the number of injured reached a shocking number of more than 1,000. Just one wave of arrows, coupled with an unexpected wave of arrows, had instantly killed more than 3,000 of the enemy. Kalu had only lost less than 200 of his cavalry, and most of them were still injured. With this great victory, he led his 5,000 cavalrymen back safely. Chapter 1251. Bastard! Bastard! Someone in the middle of the army roared loudly. He was so confident when he came, but he lost 1/10 of his combat power in one move. He couldn't accept it. He shouted at the soldiers who were beating the drums, "Signal for the attack! Go, go, go!" He was so angry that he wanted to use his advantage in numbers to destroy the enemy. Even if the enemy's arrows were sharp and he had to lose some combat power, he didn't care anymore. In short, he wanted the cavalry of the 5-star army to die. He wanted to let these people know how pitiful the consequences of angering him were. The drumbeats suddenly became hurried and became more and more frequent. Hearing the order, the Tile cavalry immediately sped up again and again, charging towards the less than 10,000 5-star army cavalry formation. On the battlefield, the drumbeat was an order. The more urgent the drumbeat, the faster and fiercer the attack. For a moment, the white snow on the ground was kicked up by the war horses. When combined with the heavy snow falling from the sky, it gave the impression that the sky was covered in white snow, greatly obstructing one's vision. This is what a fierce attack looks like. Ha-ha, retreat. Commander Kalu, who had just returned to the front with a victory, looked at the Walla cavalry from afar. He was not afraid at all. Instead, he showed an excited smile. As he waved his hand, the signal flag beside him flashed. The cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division quickly retreated 2 miles. Because of the heavy snow, the Walla cavalry couldn't see their movement clearly. They could only roughly see the 5-star army cavalry retreating. This gave them endless confidence. They thought that this was the moment to crush the enemy's heart. Victory was within their reach. However, the charging Walla cavalry did not know that what awaited them ahead was an even more painful forgetting, as well as an unimaginable trap of death. Charge, charge! The 5-star army cavalry is afraid and retreating. Charge and kill them. Faster! We can't let the 5-star army cavalry escape. Under the shouts of the Kiliarchs, the entire Walla cavalry's morale kept increasing. They kept increasing their speed. It felt like they wouldn't be able to get any credit if they were a step slower. Charge! Ah! How? Charge! Ah! Save! Charge! Ah! No! In the heavy snow, the Walla cavalry got closer and closer to the 1st Cavalry Division. When they were 1 mile away, something strange happened. Rows of sharpened wooden stakes suddenly appeared in front of them. If their vision allowed, they could make all kinds of evasive maneuvers and even stop their horses from 300 meters away to avoid any losses. But now, they were charging too fast, and their line of sight was limited. The faster the cavalry charged, the more violent the impact they had on the barricades. In a short period of time, at least 1,000 cavalrymen were killed, and the number who couldn't get up was uncountable. The appearance of the 3 barricades became a nightmare for the charging Walla cavalry. When they saw their war horses fall one after another and blood spurted out, some of the cavalry at the back finally forced themselves to stop their war horses. However, even though they stopped, the cavalrymen behind them couldn't stop. They didn't know what was going on in front of them. They were still charging forward according to the rhythm of the war drums. It was a tragedy. The cavalrymen at the front couldn't stop, and the cavalrymen at the back couldn't charge forward. In a short period of time, both sides crashed into each other. The number of cavalrymen who died from the collisions increased exponentially. In a short period of time, thousands of corpses were lying on the ground. The smell of blood filled the air. "Quick, hide to the sides." A chilly arch finally reacted and shouted out an order. As expected of the elite Walla cavalry, after a short period of chaos, order was quickly restored. The cavalrymen at the front dodged to the sides, and the cavalrymen at the back started to charge at the stakes. Bang! Clang! 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 All kinds of noises were heard. The cavalrymen who charged at the stakes were in all kinds of shapes and sizes. However, no matter what they did, they couldn't escape the fate of death. After all, there was a limit to the number of barricades. After several waves of attacks, the Vala cavalry used their lives to knock down all of the barricades. They were no longer of any use. The stakes were like a natural counter to the cavalrymen. It made people hate them, but they couldn't do anything about it. Today, the Vala cavalry had shown their fearless side, and they had completely destroyed the horse barricade that usually made them pale in fright. However, no one cheered because this was not the result they wanted. It was the result of countless lives sacrificed to make up for it. There are no more stakes in the way. Kill. When they saw another group of cavalry charge forward, but there were no shouts, the Tile cavalry on both sides cried out in excitement, and once again launched a fierce attack, looking as if they were going to take revenge. No. After charging onto the official road, the cavalry that had been silent for less than a quarter of an hour suddenly let out mournful cries. The cries became louder and louder, causing the Vala cavalry to stop in their tracks. They really couldn't figure out what was going on. This time, it wasn't the stakes that could be seen with the naked eye that blocked the road, but the caltrops that were placed under the snow. Under the cover of the heavy snow, the caltrops were hidden in the ground. Once a cavalry charged over and stomped on the caltrops, one could imagine the excruciating pain it would cause. The war horses immediately neighed, and the cavalrymen riding on them were thrown to the ground one by the frenzied war horses. Whether it was the stakes or the caltrops, Kalu was already prepared. When he received the mission, Bai Kai and the other two division commanders gave him all the caltrops in their hands. However, Kalu didn't use them immediately. It wasn't that he didn't want to use them, but the timing wasn't right. The Walla cavalry was good at fighting, and they weren't ordinary cavalrymen. They had rich battle experience, and it was impossible for them not to be prepared against conventional weapons like the stakes and caltrops. Therefore, if he wanted to use them, he had to catch them off guard. Fortunately, the heavy snow gave Kalu inspiration. That was why the series of events just now happened. Most importantly, under the heavy snow, both sides of the official road were completely sealed, forming a pile of snow that was half a person's height. The horses couldn't gallop on it, so Kalu didn't have to worry about being attacked from both sides. He could just focus on the main road. The stakes and caltrops were used separately, and it was indeed effective. However, this wasn't the end. While the enemy's charge was interrupted by the two division commanders, and the enemy's morale was unstable, Kalu led another 5,000 cavalrymen to attack. The caltrops along the way were covered by the corpses of the Walla cavalry and their horses. They only needed to step on them to charge out. Boom! The Vala cavalry who were waiting for the movement in front of them saw a torrent of people rushing out, following which arrows and sabers flew out to meet them. However, they did not expect that it would be the cavalry of the 5-star Corps that rushed out at this time. Once again, they miscalculated. In the next exchange, who knew how many of the Vala cavalry were chopped to death? As for the remaining people, they had long been beaten silly by Kalu's successive moves. They were scared and immediately turned to retreat. Their speed was even faster than rabbits. After 2 charges and 2 blocks, the five-star army won a great victory. At least 6,000 cavalrymen were killed, and the enemy's morale was greatly damaged. Kalu heaved a sigh of relief. With this defeat in front of them, as long as the enemy's division commander wasn't stupid, he wouldn't launch an attack for a while. With the joy of victory, Kalu rode his horse to the temporary military headquarters 2 miles away and met with Division Commander Suhi. He already knew about the development of the battle from the scouts. When Kalu entered the tent, Suhi stood up to welcome him. "Not bad, Kalu. Your performance is not bad. I will report your contributions to the 6th young master. I think that as the new regiment commander, you won't be able to run away from the position of division commander." So he took the initiative to stand up to welcome Kalu, which meant that he thought highly of Kalu. When he heard the other party recommend him to be the commander of the new regiment, Kalu was extremely excited. He immediately cupped his fist and said, "This general thanks the military commander for his training, but I only want to serve under the military commander." Oh, Kalu's answer greatly surprised Suhi. One must know that he was only the new army division commander. Although the new army was going to be expanded into a new regiment, there would be 3 more division commander positions. In the future, when the new army became a new regiment, there would also be 3 empty division commander positions. However, that was still far away. For a talented commander like Kalu, he couldn't wait any longer. Otherwise, it would be a serious mistake in the use of people. With an idea in his mind, Suhi patted Kalu's shoulder and said with satisfaction, "I understand your feelings, but with your talent, it's too much for you to only lead a division. If there is a chance, it will be good to lead more troops. Besides, we are all in the 5-star army, and we are all working for the 6th young master. There shouldn't be any distinction between us." After some persuasion, Kalu clearly listened to it. However, he still had a troubled expression as he said, "But I still want to be in your military seat." "All right, let's not talk about this matter for now. This army commander has only reported your name and achievements to the 6th young master. As for whether or not you have the opportunity to serve, it is not up to this army commander to decide. Just wait for orders. Okay, let's discuss how to deal with the Walla army if they launch another attack." A division commander and a division commander immediately came in front of the sand table. They pointed at the terrain on the sand table and started an intense discussion based on the military strength of both sides. The attack had been thwarted, the losses were severe, and the news of the defeat of the Walla army had spread. The expressions of the division commanders became extremely ugly. Chapter 1252. Originally, he had thought that he was leading the most elite cavalry in the world and had an absolute advantage in terms of military strength. He had thought that he would be able to win this first battle, and he would also become the first general of the 5-Nation Alliance to defeat the 5-star army on the battlefield. But he didn't expect that the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. He actually lost 6,000 soldiers. This result was too unsatisfactory, and he couldn't accept it. Should he continue to charge? Tai Chin really wanted to give such an order, but when he saw that the other generals in the tent had their heads lowered and seemed to have a lot on their minds, he finally suppressed the anger in his heart. He changed the topic and said, "Previously, I was too impulsive and caused the army to suffer losses. Regarding this matter, I will personally apologize to General Beaumeur. As for everyone, take a good rest. At the same time, build some barricades to prevent the 5-star army from attacking." A cavalry of more than 20,000 people actually had to defend against the attack of less than 10,000 5-star army. If this was said half a day ago, Tai Chin would have laughed out loud. But now, he couldn't help but admit that the 5-star army's cavalry had this kind of strength. The attack suddenly stopped. This made Suhi and Kalu, who had thought of all kinds of countermeasures to resolve the enemy cavalry's attack, confused. Seeing that the sky was about to turn dark, the two of them looked at each other and finally believed that the previous defeat must have scared the enemy's general. "Sai, what a pity. There's still so many iron caltrops that I haven't used in the horse stirring rope that I buried in the snow." Even though Kalu knew that the other party wouldn't attack for a while, he still had a sad expression on his face. These words made Suhi's eyebrows twitch. Wasn't it good that the enemy didn't attack? As for not having to risk their lives, once the main force arrived, they would have the strength to fight back, even if they had to face the enemy head-on. The new army's 3 cavalry divisions were still attacking. In the face of a sea of people, or even when the enemy cavalry was squeezed together, the arrow formation was not of much use. Under the improvisation of the 2nd Cavalry Division's commander, Peasant, they switched to using bows and arrows and horse-strapping tactics. Arrows after arrows were shot at close range, and ropes were like sharp awls, trapping the Yerkiang cavalry and dragging them under their horses. The 5-star army was like a spider weaving a web, slowly nibbling away at the surrounded Yerkiang cavalry. Aleifu, who was protected by 10,000 cavalrymen, had an extremely ugly expression on his face. He had been standing guard here for half a day. The sky was about to turn dark, but there was still no sign of reinforcements. What was going on? Even if the scouts he sent out didn't inform the Walla army in time, the Walla army should be aware of such a huge commotion, right? Sensing that the battle cries were getting closer and closer, this proved that the encirclement was getting smaller and smaller. The fear on Aleifu's face deepened. He had a feeling that this time, it was very likely that he would die here. The group of lieutenants and soldiers around him had the same thought. Originally, they thought that after persevering for a few hours, reinforcements would arrive. Then, they would work together from the inside and the outside, and they would be able to defeat the 5-star army and return to receive the king's reward. But now, it seemed that their lives were in danger. The battle cries continued, and one of the lieutenants finally couldn't help but ask, "General, when will our reinforcements arrive?" "Soon, should be soon." Aleifu, who didn't want the morale of the army to be in chaos, could only reply. Not long after he finished speaking, the sound of horse hooves suddenly came from the outer formation, followed by a hubbub of voices. "Reinforcements are coming. A lot of cavalrymen are coming." One of the soldiers was lying on the snow. When he raised his head, he had a joyful expression on his face. "Oh, then it must be the reinforcements. Ha! The reinforcements are here. Tell the brothers, we must hold on. Victory is right in front of us." Aleifu changed from his previous silent appearance. At this moment, he became lively again. That's right, reinforcements were coming, but it wasn't the Walla cavalry. After Bai Qian's repeated failures, he was indeed afraid of the 5-star army's cavalry. He chose to stay put and wait for Beaumeur to lead the main force. This action was equivalent to giving up on the 10,000 Yi Air Chong cavalry. If it wasn't the Walla cavalry, then it was the 5-star army that had chased Aleifu all the way and defeated them. They were Bai Shuang's 4th Cavalry Regiment, Dai Qua's 1st Cavalry Division, and Ma Xiangshan's Cavalry Regiment. After a series of battles, Bai Shuang and the others rested for half a day. It was this half a day that allowed Aleifu to run so far. Fortunately, the new army received the telegram and made a timely response, blocking the 10,000 cavalrymen here. After the two sides met, the commander of the new army's 2nd Cavalry Division, Bai Kai, said excitedly, "It's great that you guys are here. How about this? Let's work together and try to take down the Yi Air Chong cavalry as soon as possible." As he spoke, Bai Kai prepared to give the order to attack again. But he was stopped by Bai Shuang. "Commander Bai, don't be impatient." Although Bai Shuang was a regiment commander, he was the regiment commander of the 1st Cavalry Division and Yang Chendong student. Furthermore, he had performed many meritorious deeds. This kind of status was more than enough to be a division commander in any other unit. Since he suddenly spoke, even Bai Kai couldn't criticize him. When everyone's eyes fell on Bai Shuang, the young commander touched the tip of his nose embarrassedly and said, "Everyone, don't look at me like that. I just want to see if I can convince the Yi Air Chong cavalry. Isn't it better to subdue them without fighting? Convince them? How can this?" Bai Kai wanted to say that it was impossible. But when he considered that the situation had completely reversed and that the enemy was only hoping for the reinforcements of the Walla cavalry, there was no movement from the Walla cavalry at this time. This path should not be possible. Perhaps persuading the enemy to surrender now would have an unexpected effect. It didn't take much effort. It was just letting Bai Shuang test it out. Even if it didn't succeed, they wouldn't lose anything. The other commanders laughed and agreed to Bai Shuang's request. Thank you, everyone. I'll give it a try. Bai Shuang smiled gratefully at everyone. Then he rode his horse to the surrounded Yi Erchang's camp. He didn't know when it happened, but there was already an object similar to a loudspeaker made of iron in his hand. When he was studying with Yang Qindong in the Yang Family Academy, he made many simple and effective things like this. Now, there were many similar small things in his 4th Regiment. With the metal loudspeaker in his hand, Bai Shuang's voice echoed in the snowy night. Brothers of Yi Erchang and General Lei Fu, how are you? I am Bai Shuang, the commander of the 4th Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division of the 5-Star Army. Oh, you may not know me, but I know you because 3 nights ago, I set you up to attack the camp and defeated you. He said all this with the attitude of a victor. This kind of blatant flaunting was especially jarring to the ears of the Yi Erchang cavalry, but they could only endure it. Now that they were surrounded by the army, whoever rushed out first would be courting death. Bai Shuang didn't seem to have such awareness. He continued to talk to himself. To be honest, the 5-Star Army is very powerful, but it's just a name. It's nothing in the eyes of the powerful 5-Star Army. I'm afraid you still don't know that 3 nights ago, the Turpan cavalry was wiped out by us in one fell swoop. In comparison, you're not bad. At least 10,000 of you managed to escape. Oh, right, I forgot to tell you. 5 days ago, our 1st Cavalry Division charged out of the Ayla Mountain Pass and heavily injured the 80,000 Ely cavalry that surrounded us. We killed and captured about 60,000 of them. Also, just this afternoon, our 5-Star Army's 200,000 reinforcements suddenly appeared behind the 100,000 Walla Army. After a fierce battle, we killed a lot of them. Now, the Walla Army has fled. In other words, on this battlefield, only your cavalry of less than 10,000 is still persevering. I want to ask you, what is the meaning of your persistence? Truth and falsehood came out of Bai Shuang's mouth. This was the so-called all is fair in war. There wasn't much truth in his words, but to the Yirkiang cavalry who were ill-informed, it was enough to create a lot of pressure. The moment these words were said, many people's expressions changed. Many people started to doubt or even believe Bai Shuang's words. At this moment, Bai Shuang was still doing his political work. Yirkiang cavalry, our 5-Star Army, won't kill captives. As long as they are sincere and changing, we will give them a chance. Just like 3 days ago, when you lost, there were 17,000 captives in our hands. Now, not only are they safe, after a thorough investigation, they are free to choose their future. For example, they can join the 5-Star Army and become a part of us. Or they can become a normal citizen and be given 30 mu of grain, a wife and children, and a warm bed. They can live a life far away from the flames of war. That's such a comfortable and desirable life. The bewitching words continued. Under Bai Shuang's glib tongue, he described the future so well that many of the Yirkiang cavalry started to yearn for it. Even some of the generals started to waver. Lei Fu, who was in the middle of the army, naturally felt the change. He wanted to shout out loud and tell everyone not to believe the words of the 5-Star Army's general. But before he could say anything, Bai Shuang called out his name. General Lei Fu, I know you. Actually, we don't have any grudges. What's even better is that your appearance didn't cause any losses to the 5-Star Army. So, we welcome your surrender. If you choose to abandon the darkness and join the light, I can promise you in front of the 3 armies that we won't touch a single hair on your head. We will even ensure your safety and let you do whatever you want to do happily. I don't think anyone isn't afraid of death, let alone this kind of meaningless death. Don't you think so? Chapter 1253. All right, I've said everything that needs to be said. I'll give you the time it takes for an incense stick to burn to consider. During this time, I can guarantee the safety of those who surrender. On the other hand, if anyone still wishes to resist, the final attack will be launched after an incense stick. At that time, regardless of whether you're a general or a soldier, you will be killed without mercy. At the end of his speech, Bai Shuang's tone became incomparably resolute, revealing his cold-blooded side as a general. An incense stick would determine life and death. At this moment, the attack had already stopped. However, one could foresee that if these people did not surrender, a new round of attacks would be even more ferocious after an incense stick's worth of time. At that time, not many people would be able to survive. Apart from a night's cold wind, the camp of tens of thousands of soldiers was eerily silent. Even the war horses had stopped neighing, causing the atmosphere to become extremely strange. The silence lasted for an unknown period of time until someone among the Yi Erqiang cavalry spoke up. "I don't want to die. I still have my parents, wife, and children at home. I want to live. I want to surrender." This voice was like a stone thrown into a tranquil pool of water, instantly attracting even more resonance. For a moment, countless people echoed the voice. "That's right. We don't want to die either. We choose to surrender." As this voice became more and more intense, the cavalry began to walk out of the crowd. They threw down their weapons, dismounted, and squatted in front of the 5-star army cavalry with their hands on their heads. "Very good. Move these people over there and get them some food." Division Commander Bai Kai's face blossomed into a smile. Originally, they had to pay a price to obtain victory. Now, with just a few words, they had forced a large number of people to choose to surrender. This method of winning without expending any effort was truly brilliant. When he looked at Bai Shuang, his eyes were filled with admiration. With this example in front of them, more and more Yi Erqiang cavalry chose to surrender. They wanted to live, and they also had the right to choose between life and death. As more and more ordinary soldiers chose to surrender, some of the sergeants, Dakarches, centurions, and even 2 Kiliarchs in the army also chose to surrender. The Yi Erqiang cavalry camp seemed to be collapsing by itself. Aleifu, who was in the middle of the army, had an ugly expression on his face. Although he knew that he would be defeated, he was defeated so quickly that many of the soldiers did not even ask for his opinion before surrendering. A feeling of the general trend of the battle was deeply entangled in his heart. The number of soldiers on the outer perimeter dwindled, and the number of people who chose to surrender changed from the initial few to the entire battalion. Seeing his personal guards looking at him expectantly, Aleifu sighed deeply and said, "All right, you guys can also make your own choice. This general will not force you guys to do so, but I cannot surrender. I am Yi Erqiang's general. I am." At this moment, Aleifu still wanted to express some emotions to engrave his will. However, before he could finish his words, the bodyguard around him had already started to persuade him. "General, we've already lost. Even if you don't surrender, the result won't change. General, once the news of our defeat spreads back to the country, I'm afraid it will be very disadvantageous for you. Even if you sacrifice yourself now, you won't be able to change the result. You won't receive any glory either. General, where there's life, there's hope. As long as we're still alive, there's hope. At worst, we'll follow the general's army and stay away from the war. Wouldn't it be great to be a farmer? General, the general trend has already passed. If you don't surrender now, you'll only lose your life in vain. It's meaningless." General, all the bodyguard were trying to persuade Aleifu. Everyone had different opinions, but their goal was the same. That was to persuade the general to make the same choice as them. As a bodyguard, their greatest responsibility was to protect the general's safety. If something happened to the general, it would mean that the bodyguards did not fulfill their responsibilities. It would be a disgrace. Although they had already chosen to surrender, if the general chose to die in battle, it would also mean that they did not complete their mission. This would become a lifelong regret for many people. In order to complete the final mission, and also for Aleifu's sake, the bodyguards' voices of persuasion grew louder and louder. There were also more and more opinions. Something was obviously fake, but when many people talked about it, it would often make people believe it to be true. Aleifu was indeed prepared to fight to the death. He wanted to prove that he was a qualified general, someone who was not afraid of death. However, the bodyguard's persuasion soon made him waver. Aleifu, who was not resolute to die, listened to the bodyguard's blueprint for the future. His resolute heart slowly began to waver. 60 breaths left. Just when Aleifu felt that it was difficult to make a choice outside the camp, Bai Shuang's voice sounded again. This also woke Aleifu up. When he raised his head to look around, he was horrified to find that other than the 30 bodyguards he brought with him, there was nothing else around him. In this short period of time, the remaining 7,000 cavalry had all chosen to surrender. At first, they left one by one, but later they left in groups. Now, on the entire battlefield, only 30 people, including Aleifu, had not made their final choice. An army of several tens of thousands surrounded 30 people. The result was already decided. Not to mention that these people were only slightly stronger than ordinary cavalry. Even if each of them could fight against 100 people, they still had no chance of escaping and winning. 30 breaths. Bai Shuang's voice sounded again. It was like the wind of hell and the horn of death. When Aleifu heard it, he could not help but tremble. "General, we have no other choice. Please give the order." The bodyguards looked at Aleifu with longing eyes. At this moment, Aleifu still wanted to say a few words, but the atmosphere of the battlefield did not allow him to do so. He already had no time. "I surrender." When Bai Shuang said the last 10 breaths of time, Aleifu finally made his final decision. After saying those 3 words, his entire body collapsed. At that moment, he was like an old man that had lost all of his vitality, as if he would age at any moment. The 7,000 cavalry had all chosen to surrender. At this moment, Bai Shuang also let out a sigh of relief. Then, under everyone's gaze, he took the initiative to ride up to Aleifu and extended his right arm in a friendly manner. "General Aleifu, the 5-star army welcomes you to join." As young Shandong student, Bai Shuang's ability to see through people's hearts and borrow their power was also exceptional. The best way to defeat the 5-star army was to find some people related to the 5-star army. Only then could they better understand their opponents. Knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy was the only way to win 100 battles. Bai Shuang's sudden appearance caused Aleifu to instinctively become very nervous. He did not know if the other party would keep his promise and go back on his words to kill him. After all, in the current situation, the other party was the boss, and he was just a fish on the chopping board. Now that he did not have any military power in his hands, even if the other party really killed him, who would stand up for him? Where could he go to reason with? He originally thought that he would definitely die, and the other party was settling the score. He wondered if he had made a stupid decision. Should he have chosen to commit suicide just now? At least he would have been able to maintain the last bit of dignity in his life. However, when Bai Shuang extended his right hand, he was puzzled. He realized that the other party did not have any weapon in his hand, while he was holding a sharp saber in his right hand. This is a handshake. It is one of the etiquette of our 5-star army. It is a sign of friendship. Could it be that General Aleifu does not want to be my friend? Seeing Aleifu's nervous expression, Bai Shuang said with a smile, "Friend? Us?" At this moment, Aleifu was even more puzzled. "Yes, you chose to surrender to our 5-star army. Now we are no longer enemies, but friends. Could it be that you are not happy?" Bai Shuang said with a firm tone. Aleifu's eyes lit up. To be able to become friends with a general like Bai Shuang was definitely beneficial to him. At least he did not have to worry about his safety. He immediately put down his saber and imitated Bai Shuang's action and extended his right hand. When the 2 hands shook, he kept repeating, "Yes, we are friends, we are friends." After subduing Aleifu, the several armies merged together and headed straight for the temporary headquarters of the new army. Although they won this battle, the war was not over. It was only the beginning because there were even more powerful enemies standing in front of them that needed to be conquered. Turpan City, the city that had been under siege for several days, showed no signs of falling. On the contrary, it was getting more and more ferocious. The 10,000 infantrymen sent out by Turpan City suffered losses after repeated attacks. There were only about 3,000 left. All of this was because of money. After the first batch of city defenders, who were made up of residents, received their due rewards, more and more youths signed up to defend the city, reaching 30,000. With so many people going up the city walls and picking up weapons, the entire Turpan city was impregnable. Of course, the amount of gold and silver paid every day was not small. The mountain of silver in front of the palace square was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. Regarding all of this, Yang Qindong was not worried at all. In his eyes, any problem that could be solved with money was not a problem at all. They had a large amount of territory, as well as 3 production bases in Qiqian City, Shaowei Province, and Beginning City. Every day, just the variety of fresh products and items produced was already out of the ordinary. The products produced by the Yang family were all of the best quality, especially the endless variety of new things. They had become the most sought-after goods for various countries and forces. For example, glass products, mirrors, cigarettes, and cosmetics could bring a lot of profits for the Yang family. Chapter 1254. When money was no longer a shackle to development, it also pushed the wheel of Yangtze's development to become stronger and stronger. With money came endless motivation. When the textile industry was constantly improving and developing, the iron smelting technology had also improved. After a large area of land was also developed, Yangtze's development had become unstoppable. Every day, a large number of military supplies were transported to the front line by water and land. They were transported to the 5-star army who were about to go to war. They were the most solid backing, helping them to exert their most powerful combat power on the battlefield. Just like all the soldiers of the 5-star army in the first city and the areas west and south of the first city, each of them had a cotton military coat. It could not only keep them warm in the cold weather, but it could also become a life-saving garment. Such a good thing was envied by many of their enemies. However, they could only be envious. After all, no one could be like Yang Xie, who owned tens of millions of acres of cotton land in the entire Southeast Asia. These were also the biggest reasons why Yang Qindong could continue to fight in the north and south. It was precisely because of the sufficient logistical support and the high treatment of the soldiers that more people joined the 5-star army. This allowed the military strength of the 5-star army not to retreat after a long war, but to expand instead. Young Master, 500,000 taels of silver have been used. There are less than 7 million taels of silver left in the square. Beta Persei was not only Yang Qindong's servant, but he was also responsible for his absolute safety. Most of the time, he also acted as an assistant, secretary, or even a housekeeper. Okay, got it. Yang Qindong did not stop his actions because of Beta Persei's report. At this moment, he was drafting a telegram to send to the new 5-star army. With the sudden addition of White Shuang's 4th Regiment, the originally disadvantageous situation was instantly reversed. Although they were still inferior to the other party in terms of total military strength, they were already on par with each other in terms of combat strength. What followed next was a stalemate. At this moment, it would be a waste to send out all 3 newly formed armies. At this moment, Yang Qindong was thinking about how to counterattack. The first step of the counterattack was to break the siege of Turpan, and then make the necessary preparations for the next step. Yang Qindong was the undisputed leader of Yangtze and the 5-star army. What was a leader? He could see things that ordinary people couldn't see, think of things that ordinary people couldn't think of, and make the right decisions that ordinary people couldn't make. Taking one step and seeing 3 steps ahead was an expert. Taking one step and seeing 5 steps ahead was the style of a general. Taking one step and seeing 10 steps ahead was the style of a true leader. Yang Qindong was the master of taking one step and seeing 10 steps ahead. What he needed to do now was to prepare for the future. Transferring the new 5-star army would not only be able to break the siege of Turpan, but also lead them to launch a counterattack as soon as the other party was defeated. Yang Qindong's personality had never been one to not fight back when scolded or beaten. Perhaps it was because of his military background, but what he liked and was more used to was that if you respect me, I will return the favor tenfold. If you hit me for no reason, I will return the favor for no reason. The kind of thing where you hit me and then turn around and say sorry was absolutely impossible in his eyes. He knew that the strong were supreme and the rules were set by the strong. Yang Shandong already had the capital and ability to ignore the rules and do whatever he wanted. Just like this time, when he sent troops to the Ili region, there was no reason for it. It was just a simple deployment of troops. This was almost unimaginable in the future. After all, when a military power like the United States wanted to make a move on a small country and snatch their resources, they would first put forward a reason in the United Nations. Although this reason was sometimes laughable and unrealistic, it was still necessary to do it. And now, Yang Shandong was even more so. He didn't need any reason. If he wanted to hit you, he would hit you. If you didn't like it, you could fight with him. In the end, when you were beaten down, you would know whose fist was bigger and harder. This kind of thinking was completely different from Confucianism. In Yang Shandong's heart, there was no magnanimity that encompassed all things, nor was there any kind of action where he would withdraw his troops if they said something nice and showed that they had submitted. In his eyes, there was only the concept of enemies and allies. Either you completely submit to him, or you completely submit to him. There was no third choice. With a tough military attitude and great strength, there was no need for any alliances. All they needed was to fight until they conquered the world. When the world was under their control, it would naturally be the time to unify the world. With such a big ambition and goal, how could Yang Shandong be trapped in a small Turpan capital? When many people were worried about whether they would be surrounded if they stayed here and whether there would be danger if the city was breached, what Yang Shandong wanted to do was to use this to attract everyone's attention. How to dispatch more troops and how to kill the so-called five-nation coalition army. Yang Shandong hated the coalition army. The eight-nation coalition army had once brought shame to China, and he had not forgotten it. On the battlefield of resisting U.S. aggression and aiding North Korea, it was also the coalition army of more than a dozen countries that wanted to bully China. Although China won in the end, they also paid a heavy price because of it, and the pace of the unification of the motherland had to be slowed down indefinitely. Sometimes, Yang Shandong hated that he did not live in that era and could not personally kill the enemy on the battlefield to protect the dignity of the country. At the same time, he was glad that he did not live in that era and did not suffer the humiliation of being oppressed. But no matter what, this was a history that could not be forgotten. Now that Yang Shandong had used his ability to change everything, of course, he had to do it perfectly. As for the coalition army, all he had to do was defeat them. He had to beat them until they threw away their armor and were completely annihilated. He had to beat them until there was no place for them to survive, and everything would naturally end. With Yang Shandong's hatred for the so-called coalition army, it would be strange if he let them off easily after being surrounded by them this time. The pen in his hand fell even faster. In a short time, a telegram was drafted and handed to Beta Persei. Send the telegram to the new 5 armies. Tulu City. Winter had arrived, but no one felt cold. On the contrary, the soldiers here were a little nervous. They all felt like they were about to face a great war. There was only one reason why they felt this way. 5 miles outside Tulu City, a large number of 5-star army could be seen training here every day, carrying out various exercises such as encirclement, dispersal, attack, and retreat of cavalry and infantry. It was like a military exercise in the future. Every day, they changed different tricks and played different routines. The shouts of killing could easily be heard from 5 miles away, reaching the eyes of the beaming army soldiers guarding Tulu City. In the beginning, everyone was still very curious. Quite a few soldiers and commoners also walked up the tower with this curiosity. They looked at the constantly moving black dots from afar and heard the battle cries from afar that could not be ignored even though they were still far away. However, as time passed, they got used to it. No one paid attention to it anymore. However, Commander-in-Chief Shi Hung, who was about to send troops to Dawn City, stopped all military operations because of this. Of course, he knew about the training of the 5-star army outside the city. Not only did he know, but he also knew that this was a warning from the 5-star army. He had also sent people to calculate. When he got the answer that the number of soldiers of the five-star army outside the city had exceeded 200,000, and this number was even going to increase. Shi Heng's original plan to attack the Shi city had to be postponed indefinitely. The shouts were very loud. Just from the shouts of killing, one could hear the strong morale of the five-star army. Facing such a strong army, Shi Heng was not confident that he could win in one strike. Without confidence, he naturally would not send troops. Even though the earliest 200,000 reinforcements of the Baiming army had rushed over from Jingdu and a large amount of provisions had been transported, Shi Heng still used the cold weather as an excuse to write a letter to the acting emperor to ask if they would fight in the spring of next year. Although he said that he wanted to ask for instructions, in reality, Shi Heng had already made a decision. No matter what, he would not easily make a move. In any case, military orders could not be given. If he did not want to, he could naturally find a lot of reasons to delay. Thinking about it, when Dawn City was in trouble and was besieged for more than a year, it was still not broken through by the joint forces of the Walla army. Now that the enemy had strong soldiers and horses, how could he defeat the enemy? Because of the change in Shi Heng's thinking, the original plan of Baiming's winter offensive had to be suspended. Shi Heng was like a venomous snake hibernating in the dark, waiting for an opportunity. He did not believe that the Baiming army could continue this kind of drill every day. It must be known that mobilizing soldiers required money. With so many soldiers going back and forth to train every day, and it was so tiring, they would need more food than usual. He wanted to see how long the five-star army could last. Dawn City's new army headquarters. Yangtze walked with relaxed steps, a smile on his face as he arrived. As soon as he appeared, many people saw him from afar and greeted him warmly. Division Commander Yang is here. Are you here to see our military commander again? Yes, commander who is busy with military affairs. There are too many things that need to be done. I also ordered people to cook some nutritious soup and personally sent it over. How about it? Do you want to have a taste? Yangtze smiled as he looked at the officer who greeted him and said with narrowed eyes. The officer did not dare to answer. This was for their military commander. There was no reason for him to taste it first. He quickly found an excuse that he was too busy and kindly refused. Yangtze chuckled and did not take it seriously. He was just being polite and did not take it seriously. He still walked into the military headquarters. At this time, Tiger's Mane was looking at some information in his hands in a spacious office. His brows were tightly knitted together. When there was a knock on the door, he habitually shouted, "Come in." He first smelled a fragrance, then saw Yangtze walk in with a smile. Chapter 1255. Oh, you're here. Quick, let me take a look at this list. Is there anyone you're familiar with? As soon as he saw Yangtze appear, Tiger's Mane acted as if he saw his savior. He pulled the other person over and then reached out to take the hot soup from the correspondent behind Yangtze. The correspondent tactfully retreated and closed the door behind him. After there were no outsiders, Yangtze's eyebrows were also tightly knitted together. He looked at the list that was just shoved into his hand and said, "Tiger's Mane, is this the list of military commanders submitted by the army headquarters?" That's right. Tiger's Mane had already opened the soup pot. He took a deep breath of the fragrance and showed a satisfied expression as he answered. This is too many people. There are 11 candidates for the commander position, but there are only 3 positions. How do we choose? Yangtze finally knew why Tiger's Mane was worried. If it was him, he would also have a headache because there were too many monks and too little porridge. One had to know that anyone who could be on this list was not a mediocre person. Not only were their talents not simple, but their backgrounds were also very complicated. If he didn't do it well and couldn't figure out the relationship, he would offend people. It was fine to offend a gentleman, but if he offended a villain, he could be stabbed in the back at any time. No one would like this feeling. Wrong. It's true that there are 11 people, but it's not 3 positions. There's only 1 position left. Tiger's Mane replied, while drinking the hot soup with an expression of enjoyment on his face. I've already reported Lu Zhua's name to the young master. Not only did the young master agree, but he also decided on another position. It's the commander of a new army's 1st Cavalry Division, Kalu. Therefore, There's only one empty position left. F***, how do we choose? This is too difficult. When he heard that it was only 1 out of 11, Yang Si didn't know what to do. Of course it's hard. Otherwise, why would I be so worried? Tiger's Mane could tell that Yang Si had the intention to retreat, so he immediately cut off his path of retreat. You should know that when our new army is formed, you will lose your position as the logistics commander. It's not like you don't know this. It's related to your future. Tiger's Mane was right. With the continuous development of the 5-star army, the logistics of the army had become the most important issue. Yang Chendong also decided to establish a logistics department for the army. Based on Yang Si's consistent performance, he naturally became the best choice for the logistics commander. Once he was promoted to commander, Yang Si's data would increase from 1 to 2. That would be even more awesome than an ordinary commander. Yang Si was naturally looking forward to it. However, Yang Chendong also said that the logistics department needed to fully cooperate with the establishment of the new regiment. Only when the new regiment was established would it be changed from a division to a division. This was why Tiger's Mane said those words just now. After being checkmated by Tiger's Mane, Yang Si didn't decline and looked at the list seriously. At this moment, the two didn't mention asking for help from Yang Chendong. They knew that the young master was already very busy. If they let him worry about the selection of a commander, wouldn't it show that they were too incompetent? Although these 11 people might have backgrounds behind them and represent different interests, one was Yang Chendong's errand boy since he was young, and the other was a servant of the Yang family. When the two of them joined forces, there were not many people who could make them feel afraid. I'm not familiar with most of the people on this list. How about this? I'll look for third brother and ask him to do a detailed investigation of these people. Yang Si also shook his head after looking at it for a while. He hadn't heard of many of the names. If he was asked to make a choice now, it would be a bit difficult. The third brother that Yang Si mentioned was naturally the current director of the Security Bureau, Yang San. Over the years, the Security Bureau's development could be said to be very powerful. Its tentacles extended to all walks of life. It was definitely not a problem to investigate these 11 people with high identities. At the same time, Tiger's Mane, who was also the director of the intelligence department, nodded after listening. Okay, then I'll send a telegram to Yang San in the name of the director. After this telegram was sent out, it suddenly had a great impact on the entire Yang Xie and the 5-star army. But this is a story for later. New 5-star army. At this time, they had just entered 8 Mile City and were taking a short rest here. The 1st Division and the 2nd Division both arrived a step earlier than the new 5-star army. At this time, the 1st Division had already entered the battlefield, and the 2nd Division was also preparing to leave the city in 2 days. Only the new 5-star army that had just arrived still had to wait for the 2nd Division to set off before they followed. It's just that the plan didn't change as fast as the changes. A telegram was presented to Commander Shi Wanshan, causing his expression to become extremely nervous. Bugnam of Gojoseon is actually surrounded in Turpan City. Looking at this telegram with the word top secret written on it, Shi Wanshan was dumbfounded. His hand that was holding the telegram trembled. He looked up and found that there was no one else around, so he calmed down a little. He knew very well in his heart what kind of sensation and impact this news would cause once it was spread out. He was afraid that the entire battle plan would have to be changed. After all, no one's safety could be compared to Yang Chendong's. Such an important rescue operation was actually handed over to the new 5-star army. This is absolute trust and also a heavy responsibility. After reading all the contents of the telegram, Shi Wanshan let out a deep breath. There was some excitement in his eyes, but more than that, there was excitement. As a surrendered general and the commander of the new 5-star army, Shi Wanshan had always been under a lot of pressure. Because of their foundation, many high-ranking generals in the new 5-star army were surrendered generals. But it was very rare for someone like them to be given the important position of commander right after they surrendered. Shi Wanshan had also heard that his position had already been favored by some people. His appearance was tantamount to breaking some people's wishful thinking. Now, He didn't know how many pairs of eyes were staring at him, waiting for him to make a mistake and kick him into the dust. Because of this, Shi Wanshan had to be very careful and cautious with every move he made. This was to not give out any information that could be used against him and bring him trouble. At the same time, he also had to think about how to make contributions on the battlefield to prove his ability and to slap the mouse of those who looked down on him. He had already thought about how to show his daring side and prove his strength in this battle with the coalition forces of the 5 countries. He never thought that an even better opportunity to prove himself would appear. Come to think of it, winning any battle wouldn't be more influential than resolving the danger of Yang Chendong being besieged. And since this heavy responsibility had fallen on his shoulders, he had to complete it well. This was the first battle since the establishment of the new 5-star army, so he had to fight it well. Come, call all the division commanders here for an emergency meeting. Shi Wanshan was very excited, but he didn't blindly order the army to set off immediately. He had to gather everyone's wisdom and strength and hold a meeting to list all the possible problems. If they could solve it, they would solve it. If they couldn't, they would try their best to solve it. Not long after the messenger left, the 4 division commanders of the new 5-star army, Ancient River, Liu, Meng Chao, and Ning Wenfeng, rushed to the temporary military headquarters and appeared in front of Shi Wanshan. Everyone is here. Take a seat and read the telegram first. Shi Wanshan didn't beat around the bush and went straight to the point. The 4 division commanders were all confused. They didn't understand what kind of telegram could make the military chief so solemn. However, when they finished reading the contents of the telegram, they all stood up in shock. It was obvious that the contents of the telegram were too shocking. Military chief, is this telegram real? The commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Liu, couldn't help but ask after passing the telegram to the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, Meng Chao. But after asking the question, he smiled awkwardly. What kind of joke was this? The telegram was something unique to the 5-star army. Who would know how to make it? Also, even if it was fake, no one would dare to joke about such a thing. Shi Wanshan didn't ask any questions because there was no need to. He just looked at the 4 division commanders with a serious expression. When they all finished reading the telegram and looked up, his voice rang out. Military intelligence is in order. Bugnam of Gojoseon is surrounded. This is an urgent matter. The fact that the new 5-star army is in charge of solving the situation is a form of trust. So this time, we must perform perfectly. Yes, we must perform perfectly. This is the first battle of the new 5-star army. We must do well. The 4 division masters spoke excitedly. Clearly, they had already realized the importance of this mission. Their enthusiasm and understanding were all aroused. Seeing this, Shi Wanshan pointed at the sand table that was already set up and said, "Come, let's discuss how to solve the siege of Turpan City as quickly as possible." Tai Chin waited until General Bo Mu arrived the next morning. Then, he went up to greet him with a guilty expression. Originally, Bo Mu could have arrived last night. However, after receiving the news from Tai Chin, he didn't rush. Instead, he set off with the provisions and other supplies. He was worried that the 5-star army would suddenly attack them and take their provisions. After all, even the Yirkian cavalry was mysteriously defeated. He wasn't very clear about what had happened. Therefore, his vigilance towards the 5-star army's cavalry was at its highest level. All right, victory and defeat are common in war. No matter what, it's good that you worked hard. Let's talk about the specific situation. Bo Mu rushed to the front of the tent and sat down at the head of the table. He stared at Tai Chin. Chapter 1256. Then, under Tian's introduction, he very objectively reported the matter, including the situation reported by the scouts sent by Lei Fu. Bo Mu finally knew the whole story and said with a serious expression, "In that case, the 5-star army really has a lot of capable people. The Han people's culture is really broad and profound, and their art of war can't be underestimated. Yes, those 5-star army cavalry didn't fight head-on with us at all. If you charge, they will retreat. If you retreat, they will advance. With all kinds of methods, it is really impossible to guard against them. Tyne seemed to have found a confidant and continued to complain. All right, although the 5-star army is strong, our Walla cavalry is the elite of the grassland. We don't fear any enemy, and a true warrior will not find excuses for failure. A cold voice came out from Muir's mouth. Although he didn't punish Tyne, he still lost the battle, so he definitely didn't have a good expression. Yes, Tyne became obedient after being reprimanded. Muir didn't look at Tyne again, and instead pondered. He was considering the advantages and disadvantages of both sides. After thinking for a long time, he said with a confident tone, "Since the other side's weakness is that they don't have enough troops, then we will take advantage of this. Come, call all the generals over." The news that Muir had arrived with 70,000 Walla cavalry was immediately seen by the scouts and sent back. In the 5-star army's tent, Sui's expression became much more serious. He already knew from the information that Muir was very cautious. When he was guarding chaotic Well City, he didn't make a single mistake. He was really one of the most difficult enemies to deal with in the Walla army. This Muir definitely won't advance rashly unless he doesn't send troops. Once he sends troops, he will definitely advance steadily. Everyone, do you have any good ideas? So he hadn't fought with Muir before, so he naturally didn't have much experience. His gaze fell on the other military officers. Everyone was the same as He, who had never fought with Muir before. However, this wasn't the first time they had come into contact with the Walla army. Strictly speaking, the 5-star army had never lost in a real war. This time, they firmly believed that victory was theirs. The commander of the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division, Daikwa, was the first to express his opinion. Counter soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. We'll just have to carry a head on our shoulders and see who's the real deal on the battlefield. This wasn't really an opinion, just a kind of attitude. To this, the other generals all nodded in agreement. Sui knew that there wouldn't be a better way to deal with the enemy in a short period of time. Thus, he said, "All right, since that's the case, we'll just stay still and see what methods they have." So he didn't mention the matter of taking the initiative to attack, because even if the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division, by Xuan's 4 regiments, and Ma Xiangshan's Light Cavalry Regiment were added, he only had 50,000 soldiers. Compared to the Walla cavalry, there was still a large gap. With such a large difference in strength, if they were to take the initiative to attack, the first to suffer the same losses would be him. After deciding on the strategy of staying still, the other generals walked out of the tent one by one. When Bai Xuan was about to leave with the others, Suhi called out to him. Only the 2 of them were left in the tent. A nervous and anxious voice sounded. "Commander Bai, the 1st Cavalry Division is currently heavily surrounded. What's the situation like?" I don't know either." Bai Xuan shook his head. He indeed didn't take the initiative to contact Division Commander Tian Hu. Although he was a member of the 1st Cavalry Division, his battlefield wasn't there, so he didn't pay much attention to it. According to the radio regulations set by Yang Chendong, without the permission of the higher-ups, the army was not allowed to communicate privately. This was an ironclad rule. Once, Tiger's Mane, the commander of the Biming army, forgot about this matter and took the initiative to send a message to the new 2nd Army. He wanted to ask if they had any thoughts of surrendering to Biming. Later, when Yang Chendong found out, Tiger's Mane was punished and the transmitter was even more miserable. He was directly transferred back to the headquarters to an unimportant department. Using Yang Chendong's words at that time, "The commander doesn't know the rules of confidentiality, but you, the translator, don't know? Don't you know how to warn and stop?" Even Tiger's Mane was punished with a warning, so no one else dared to make a mistake. This was also the reason why the armies and divisions didn't know that Turpan was surrounded. From a certain point of view, this was very important to stabilize the overall situation. The result was that there were some things that Yang Chendong wanted everyone to know, so they could know. If he didn't want them to know, then no one would know. Without permission, they couldn't take the initiative to send a message to the 1st Cavalry Division. So he wanted to understand the situation on the other side through White Xuan. Although he and Tian, who were in a competitive relationship most of the time, the 2 of them were both members of the 5-star army, and they had long since become friends. But he didn't expect that White Shuang didn't know about this matter. Sui nodded and said, "From the looks of it, the situation on the other side shouldn't be serious. The sixth young master also doesn't want us to send reinforcements. It shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't be a problem. After all, 80,000 cavalrymen surrounded less than 20,000 people." The huge difference in strength made it impossible not to worry. It was reasonable for Su He to have such thoughts. When White Shuang heard these words, he smiled confidently. "Commander Su, thank you for your concern for the 1st Cavalry Division. But you can rest assured that 80,000 people won't be enough to defeat us." "You're that confident?" Looking at White Shuang's expression, Su He originally wanted to ask why he was so confident. But he was afraid that this would cause White Shuang to dislike him. So he changed his approach. "That's right," White Shuang replied confidently. "If these 80,000 people suddenly appeared and attacked the 1st Cavalry Division in a sneak attack, then there might be some problems." But now Su He was smart and immediately understood what White Shuang meant. He asked with a surprised expression, "Oh, Commander White, are you saying that Commander Tian, who purposely attracted the enemy's attention?" At this point, there was no need for White Shuang to hide anything. He immediately replied, "Yes, all of this is teacher's idea. The enemy has 1,000,000 soldiers, and we don't have the advantage in terms of numbers. When it comes to understanding the terrain, we are at a disadvantage. That's why we lured the enemy out of its hole. It's hard for some people to think that this is a good opportunity. Actually, from the moment they split up, they were destined to fail." White Shuang wasn't talking nonsense. He had already asked Yang Chendong about this. At first, he didn't know about this plan. When he knew that he could send reinforcements out of Hobokseri, his first thought was to reinforce the 1st Cavalry Division. It wasn't far from Hobokseri, and it was his old unit. It was Yang Chendong who sent him a telegram and explained the situation. He also said that Commander Tian, who was already prepared, and he didn't need to worry. However, the other 5-star army units were relatively weaker and needed his help. For the sake of confidentiality, Yang Chendong only told Tian Hu about it. Everyone else was kept in the dark. White Shuang also saw that the situation was basically stabilized and told Commander Su He the truth. Su He finally knew what was going on. He sighed and said with a face full of admiration, "As expected, only the 6th young master can do something like this. This time the 5-star army is going to shoot themselves in the foot." So he didn't ask how the world's 1st Cavalry Division was able to face 80,000 people with 16,000 people and was confident in winning 1 against 5. This was because he believed that this was a team that could create miracles. Now, it was just the appearance of another miracle. As a matter of fact, the 1st Cavalry Division was well prepared. When they left Hobokseri, they had brought enough food and equipment. At that time, Commander Tian, who also didn't have enough confidence that they would attract the enemy. He was just following Yang Chendong's orders. He didn't expect that the enemy would be 80,000 Ili cavalry. When the scouts at the periphery of the Ala Mountain Pass reported this to Tian Hu, he was really excited. He was really worried that even if they could attract the enemy, the number of enemies was too small. It wouldn't be enough. Now, 80,000 Ili cavalry was enough to fill the 1st Cavalry Division's stomach. Of course, if the 80,000 Ilyangli cavalry that surrounded them knew about this, they would probably be fuming mad. After all, they had 80,000 Ili cavalry. Tung Mushi, who didn't know that the 1st Cavalry Division was already prepared, was looking forward to the arrival of the 5-star army's reinforcements. In his eyes, the 16,000 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division were already food on a plate. What he needed to do now was to attract more 5-star army and then fight a big battle to obtain more victory. However, he sent out a lot of scouts, but he didn't see any sign of the 5-star army's reinforcements. This made Tung Mushi, who was originally very confident, feel worried for some reason. Tung Mushi's worry increased day by day. A few days later, he still didn't see any reinforcements from the 5-star army. Instead, he saw the general of the Tushi army with the banner of the Turpan army. Chapter 12:57. After Tushi's camp was raided, he immediately fled. Not only that, he also gathered his troops along the way. Now, the number of cavalry under his command had recovered to 15,000. Although it was only half of his peak, he still had hope in his heart. That was the 80,000 Ely cavalry at the Ayla mountain pass. Tushi, who had already lost, should have done something to make up for his mistakes. However, after being beaten by the 5-star army, coupled with the fact that he did not have enough troops, he did not dare to take the initiative to find trouble with the 5-star army. After thinking about it, he came all the way west to meet up with the Ely cavalry. In Tushi's eyes, if there was a 5-star army on the battlefield that was the easiest to deal with, it would undoubtedly be the heavily surrounded 1st Cavalry Division. Attacking this place was also the most likely way to gain merit. Tushi's arrival made Tung Mushi know a lot of things, but because of this, he became unhappy. Why? It was obvious that this person was here to steal merit from him. Who would be happy if it was someone else? There was no need to mention the fact that the 15,000 Turkmen cavalry were in an extremely sorry state. Their camp had been raided, and their rations were long gone. At this moment, they were all starving. The moment they entered the camp, they started to clamor for food, looking like hungry ghosts that had been reincarnated from starvation. Tung Mushi was confident that even without any external help, it would be easy for his 80,000 cavalrymen to deal with the 16,000 cavalrymen of the 1st Cavalry Division. However, since the other party was here, he could not just ignore them. After all, they were in an alliance, and everyone was considered to be allies. Men, prepare some hot food for the Turafan cavalry. Give them some tents and let them rest. In front of Tushi, Tung Mushi gave his orders. Someone immediately went to do it. However, Tushi did not leave immediately. Instead, he came in front of Tung Mushi and said, "Old General Tung, what we need now is not rest, but battle. The current situation is completely different from what we expected. The 5-star army doesn't intend to engage in a large-scale battle at the Ayla Mountain Pass. They've already made their move. Now that there's no need for this bait to exist, I'm willing to declare war on the 1st Cavalry Division. At the same time, only by resolving the battle here can we send our troops back and join up with the other allied forces to launch a pincer attack on the 5-star army." Tushi wanted to ask for a battle and said it in such a dignified manner. Even Tingmu, she could not find any reason to refuse. In his heart, he was also very worried that the other allied forces would be heavily injured by the 5-star army, which did not play by the rules. "All right, I'll grant your request. However, you have just arrived from afar. You should rest for a day first. Once you have recovered, we will discuss the matter of the battle tomorrow." Tung Mushi agreed, but he did not immediately send out his troops. Previously, he had surrounded the 1st Cavalry Division and did all the defensive work to prevent the enemy from breaking out. Now, it was time to change it to an attack. Some of the military arrangements also needed to be adjusted. Tushi, who only wanted to ask for a battle and get a share of the credit, saw that Tung Mushi had agreed to his request and left the tent with a satisfied expression. After that, Tung Mushi immediately ordered someone to call the other generals over. He needed to discuss a new battle plan and change from defense to offense. In the headquarters of the 1st Cavalry Division, compared to the icy cold outside, it was as warm as spring. This time, the purpose of this operation was to lure the enemy and not to go on a pincer attack like before. Therefore, the various military resources they brought were extremely abundant. Just the amount of charcoal they brought was sufficient. At this moment, the charcoal was burning in the tent, releasing a unique warm aura. Division Commander Tian, who was currently sitting not far away from the charcoal brazier with his eyes closed. There were also 4 other regimental commanders in the tent. They all maintained the same posture and did not speak. It was as if they were waiting for something. "They're here, men." Outside the tent, the 1st Cavalry Division's reconnaissance battalion commander, Helu, walked into the tent with an excited expression. As he entered, the 10 eyes of the 5 people in the tent instantly opened, and their gazes shot straight at him. "Division commander, regimental commanders, the enemy's camp has indeed sent a group of enemies. There are about 15,000 of them, and they are currently cooking in the camp. Moreover, Many of the generals have left their posts and are heading towards the main tent. After Hu Helu finished speaking, he looked at the division commander with a gaze of admiration. The situation, he reported, was surprisingly similar to Tian Hu's analysis. Seeing Hu Helu's expression of admiration, Tian Hu laughed heartily and said, "Don't look at me like that. This is all the information that teacher sent me in advance. I'm just saying it based on my feelings." Haha. Although it was said that he had received the information first before coming up with such an analysis, to be able to guess the situation so accurately was not something an ordinary person could do. Tian Hu's words caused everyone to laugh. Then, they quickly quieted down and focused their gaze on Division Commander Tian Hu. "All right, everyone, don't look at me like that. Since everything is going according to the previous plan, what are you waiting for? Let's split up and move. Remember, our 1st Cavalry Division does not make a move. Once we make a move, we have to show our might. We've been surrounded for more than a month. Now is the time for us to collect our interest." When Tian Hu said this, his body revealed a strong self-confidence. His gaze was filled with incomparable confidence. That was, victory would definitely belong to them. With 16,000 people, they were going to fight 80,000 people. No, it was 95,000 people. If it were any other army, they would not be able to defend well even if they wanted to. However, Sui wanted to take the initiative to attack. Just this boldness alone was not something an ordinary person could do. Of course, sometimes fighting a war not only depended on courage, but also on strength. Did the 1st Cavalry Division have this kind of strength? The answer was of course yes. They had this kind of strength. Although they were not an all-firearms army like the Cold Vanguard Army, they still had advanced weapons that other cavalry divisions did not have. For example, they had the Big Dipper crossbow. The full name of the Big Dipper crossbow was the Big Dipper steel crossbow. It was a batch of cold weapons manufactured in Yangtze's military factory. Its biggest advantage was that it could fire 7 arrows consecutively. Moreover, its range could reach up to 150 paces, which was about 120 meters. If it were not for the fact that some parts of the Big Dipper crossbow were very troublesome to manufacture, it would have been supplied to the entire army long ago. However, it could not be used by the entire army. For example, the 1st Cavalry Division was equipped with the Big Dipper crossbow. In order to complete this mission, Tian Hu brought along the Big Dipper crossbow. At this moment, every soldier was equipped with one. As for the bows and arrows, each soldier was equipped with 10 sets, which was a total of 70 arrows. In total, the number of bows and arrows alone was close to 1 million. This was quite a shocking number. It was also the entire stock of the 1st Cavalry Division. Even if Yangtze's military factory were to manufacture these, it would take more than a year of hard work by thousands of people in a special department. Using so many bows and arrows on a single enemy, one could imagine what kind of shocking result it would have. The reason why Yang Chendong dared to put the 1st Cavalry Division in such a dangerous situation was because of the Big Dipper crossbow. Such a good weapon, whether it was for defense or offense, was a powerful weapon. Knowing the strength of this weapon, Yang Chendong had already ordered Yangtze's military factory to speed up production. It was a pity that what Yangtze lacked the most were iron and copper ores. Although they had occupied a lot of territory and obtained some similar resources, they had given them to the Navy first. In comparison, the demand was greater than the supply. Otherwise, the strength of the 5-star army would increase by more than a level. With the Big Dipper crossbow, the 1st Cavalry Division would be like a tiger that had grown wings. Chapter 1258. Just like now, the 8 Li charge didn't escape the notice of the 10,000 cavalry on the Eastern Front. When the scouts informed the army of the 5-star army's charge, the 10,000 cavalry who were prepared immediately donned their battle armor, picked up their sabers, and mounted their war horses. What's going on? Why are they attacking in broad daylight? And when the general isn't here? After a deputy general mounted his horse, he could already vaguely see a torrent of smoke and dust charging towards them from afar. An unnatural look of fear flashed across his eyes. The general went to the main tent to participate in a meeting. The remaining 2 deputy generals looked at each other and expressed their intention to fight. After all, the scouts reported that the enemy only had around 4,000 cavalry. They had 10,000 cavalry here. Even if they were unprepared, they still had the confidence to win against 2 times their number. However, for safety's sake, one of the deputy generals said to a young scout, "Hurry to the main tent and inform the general that the 5-star army is about to break through from the east." The young scout turned around and left. Around 5 minutes after he left, the 4,000 cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division's 3rd Regiment appeared. It was still the same formation of the tip of the arrow. The 4,000 cavalry were divided into small groups of 30 or 40. They formed over 100 groups and charged forward. Looking from afar, the horses galloped and the red flags fluttered. It was quite a sight. Oomph! They overestimate themselves. Everyone, draw your sabers and charge. When they saw that the enemy only had around 4,000 cavalry, the 2 deputy generals revealed a confident expression. They already couldn't wait to make a big contribution. If they could deal with the 5-star army's cavalry before the general returned, the merit would definitely be given to the 2 of them. As the 2 deputy generals drew their sabers and brandished their reins, the rest of the Ely cavalry also followed suit and charged forward while shouting and yelling. Compared to the 3rd group that had come from afar, it was only slightly more powerful. Facing an army that was twice their size, the 4,000 5-star army's cavalry did not show any fear. They were the strongest cavalry in the world. They had the strongest cold weapons, the 7-star crossbow. They had the sharpest saber and the will to fight. They did not fear any enemy. Prepare to fire. When Hubo noticed that the enemy was only 1 li away from her, she shouted loudly. Following this shout, a small crossbow appeared in the hands of every soldier. It was the Big Dipper crossbow. Everyone, slow down your horses and wait for the enemy to come within 150 steps before launching a progressive attack. According to the requirements of the usual training, the team leaders of the arrow tip began to make various preparations according to the training outline. The 4,000 5-star army cavalrymen, who were originally charging at an extremely fast speed, seemed to have taken some sort of medicine at the same time. Their speed began to slow down. The deputy generals who were currently being attacked by the other side immediately understood what was going on. One of them immediately laughed loudly and said, "Did you see that? In the face of our charge, the 5-star army has admitted defeat. Come on, let's use this opportunity to charge forward and settle this with a single battle." At that moment, the cavalry's morale was greatly boosted. When they saw the 5-star army slow down, they instinctively thought that the enemy was afraid of them. They immediately shouted loudly and increased the speed of their whips. Because of this, the distance between the 2 sides did not decrease due to the 5-star army slowing down or even stopping. On the contrary, the distance between the 2 sides was still rapidly closing. 300 meters, 200 meters, 150 meters. As the distance between the 2 sides grew closer and closer, they could even clearly see the cold gleam of the enemy's saber under the sunlight. The distance between the 2 sides was less than 100 meters, and it was approaching the distance of 80 meters, 70 meters. "Fire!" Hubo shouted out loud. Following that, arrows were shot out like a swarm of locusts towards the charging enemy cavalrymen. At such a distance, the cavalrymen also began to reflect the arrows. In a cavalry battle, this often meant that close combat was about to begin. Most of the time, arrows were just the prelude to close combat, so no one took it seriously. Shio, shio, shio. Shio, shio, shio. Both sides shot back and forth. It seemed very lively, but the results were very different. The cavalrymen's arrows were blind. The only ones who were accurate were the sharpshooters. However, most of these arrows were dodged by the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division who were adept to horse riding. On the other hand, the crossbows of the 4,500 star troopers were indeed fixed-point attacks. Every crossbow shot had a clear target. In addition, they were already very stable with the mechanism in their hands. Moreover, they were shooting in parallel. Every arrow shot down was flying toward the target at high speed. It was as if they would not return until they had achieved something. The cavalrymen of the Ely army had never seen such a thing before. It was only when the 1,000 cavalrymen at the front were all hit by the arrows and fell from their horses that they finally realized the power of the 5-star army's archery. However, it was clearly too late for them to react. Now that they had entered the range of the Big Dipper crossbow, there was no way to save them. As more and more crossbow bolts were fired, more and more of the Ely cavalry were killed by the bolts or fell to the ground from their injuries. The so-called advantage in numbers had now become a living target for the 5-star army. The more people there were, the higher the probability of the arrows hitting the target, and the more cavalrymen fell from their horses. What's going on? When he realized that the number of cavalrymen at the front was decreasing and that he, who was originally in the middle, was about to become the vanguard, one of the deputy generals revealed a puzzled expression. In an instant, this thought flashed through his mind. Before he could react, a crossbow arrow had already pierced through the air and headed straight for his head. It must be said that the deputy general was indeed different from normal soldiers. When he saw a black shadow approaching, he instinctively swung his sword. The crossbow arrow collided with the cavalry's sword, and after a crisp ding sound, the arrow flew to the side. However, before the deputy general could react, another crossbow arrow flew over. Another crisp sound of collision sounded, and the crossbow arrow fell to the ground again. However, the third, fourth, and fifth crossbow arrow quickly followed. It was clear that the 5-star army's cavalrymen had noticed this deputy general's extraordinariness, and he became the target of their care. Facing the seemingly endless crossbow arrows flying towards him, the deputy general was shocked, but at the same time, he could not understand. The enemy only had 4,000 cavalrymen, so how could they continuously fire crossbow arrows? The answer was that no one would answer him, and he would bring this question to hell. Perhaps there would be a kind-hearted person who would explain it to him. However, the reality was that after a few rounds of crossbow arrows, the deputy general finally couldn't dodge in time, and an arrow pierced his heart. His body staggered, and after a breath of time, he fell from his horse. The death of this deputy general caused many of the other cavalrymen to reveal an expression of shock. Even their deputy general had died in battle, and at this moment, they were still at least 30 steps away from the 5-star army. This seemed to have become a death zone, and no one could jump over it, and no one could step into it. After a series of defeats and losses, the cavalry finally began to retreat. In their eyes, these opponents were not human at all, especially the speed of their arrows, which was beyond their imagination. Even when the Mongol Empire was at its peak, their archers could not maintain such speed. The morale of the Ely army's cavalry had plummeted after they had suffered heavy losses. They were no longer as high-spirited as before. Some of them had even turned around and left. They wanted to maintain a sufficient distance from the 5-star army. Want to leave? A mocking look flashed across Hubo-Er's face. What did they think the 3rd Regiment was? That they could come and go as they pleased? Was this really a market? Come on, boys, it's time for us to charge. Charge! Hubo-Er put away the 7-star crossbow in his hands and pulled out his cavalry blade. With a loud roar, he led the charge towards the retreating cavalrymen. In all honesty, the cavalrymen were not truly afraid. They only wanted to retreat a little and maintain a sufficient distance from the 5-star army, so as to not let the crossbows unleash their full power. However, under Hubo-Er's charge, they seemed to have become a defeated army and wanted to turn around and flee. Behind them came the rumbling of hooves, and the snow that was kicked up covered their bodies, giving off a feeling of heavenly soldiers descending from the heavens. The 4,000 cavalrymen of the 5-star army were filled with fighting spirit. With the help of the 7-star crossbows, their morale was greatly boosted. Seeing that their commander had taken the lead, how could they be courteous? All of them kept their crossbows and pulled out their cavalry blades, roaring as they charged forward. On the other hand, the Ely cavalry's morale had fallen to the lowest point. They only wanted to turn around and retreat a little. However, the 5-star army took advantage of this opportunity. Hearing the battle cries behind them, They looked around and saw that their comrades were frantically fleeing. Occasionally, there were some who wanted to resist. However, when they saw that the situation was about to change, they could only sigh in their hearts before turning around and fleeing together with them. In this way, the retreat became a true retreat. This trick made many of the Ilianli cavalry feel extremely depressed. However, they did not have any way to turn the situation around. This was because if they stopped and dared to turn around, they would have to face the cold blades and merciless killing intent of the 5-star Corps cavalry. Chapter 1259. An army was defeated like a mountain. When two armies fought, as long as their morale was still there and they were still charging forward, even the side with fewer people could still cause enough damage to the side with more people. It wasn't impossible for them to turn defeat into victory. After all, in history, there were countless instances of people winning with fewer people. However, once the morale was destroyed and they couldn't form an effective counterattack, then there was really no other way. The more people there were, the easier it was to cause chaos, and it wouldn't help the overall situation. Just like the 3 great battles during the liberation period, the reason why the National Army was defeated was because their morale was at an all-time low. In the process of capturing captives, a squad could often capture 300 to 400 enemies, creating countless miracles. The current situation was similar to the National Army fleeing in defeat. Without command, morale, and fighting spirit, the only thing the cavalry could do was to run. They didn't need to run too fast. As long as they were a little bit faster than their comrades, there would be a chance for them to escape with their lives. Everyone only cared about running away. No one thought about fighting, and no one thought about resisting. That was tantamount to putting themselves to death. Only those who ran faster than them would benefit. With such a thought, those who could escape fled with all their might. Those who were slow simply threw away their weapons and knelt down to surrender. They had heard that on the battlefield, under normal circumstances, the 5-star army wouldn't kill any captives. After a series of attacks, only less than 3,000 of the 10,000 Ely cavalry managed to escape. Among them, the number of cavalry who gave up on escaping reached close to 5,000, far exceeding the number of the 3rd Regiment soldiers. In other words, there were only about 2,000 cavalry who were killed on the battlefield. This was the importance of morale and fighting spirit, and this was also the reason why they could win with fewer people. If these captives resisted with all their might, even if they couldn't win, they could still inflict heavy damage to the 5-star army. When people are united, Mount Tai will move. This sentence could be said by anyone, but when it came to the crucial moment, there were too few people who could do such a thing. Battalion commanders Hu and Lu, take 2 battalions with you to watch over the captives and clean up the battlefield. Collect as many crossbow bolts as you can. Hu Bo shouted to Hu He Lu before leading the other 8 battalions to chase after the fleeing Ely belly cavalry. According to the military plan, defeating the enemy in front of them was not their goal. Their true opponent was the 80,000 cavalrymen led by Tung Mushi. Following the defeat of the 10,000 Ely cavalry soldiers on the west side, the Ely cavalry soldiers on the east and north sides were also defeated by Commander Lu Duo of the 2nd Regiment and Commander Gong Feng of the 5th Regiment, respectively. For a time, the battlefield was filled with scenes of the cavalry fleeing in disorder. Not far behind them, the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division, who were full of vigor and morale, were chasing after them. Within General Tung Mushi's tent, he was discussing with a few important generals on how to deal with the 5-star army. All of a sudden, scouts appeared one after another, bringing bad news. When he heard that the defensive lines on the east, west, and north had been broken in just a short hour, Tung Mushi's face revealed a look of disbelief. That was 30,000 cavalrymen. Even if they were 30,000 pigs, they couldn't possibly be wiped out by the 5-star army in such a short time. He wanted to say that this was fake news, but seeing the looks of fear on the faces of the scouts, Tung Mushi had no choice but to believe it. At that moment, he broke out in cold sweat. Could it be that the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division was really that strong? With 80,000 cavalrymen, They could not even suppress an enemy that was 5 times their number. Tung Mushi's thoughts were still wandering when another scout rushed into the tent, kneeling on one knee as he reported, "General, there are 5-star army cavalrymen outside the tent. They are challenging us. They even dared to come here?" At this moment, Tung Mushi's entire body was emitting a murderous aura. It was as though he had become a few decades younger. The demeanor and aura of an experienced general was completely released at this moment. Previously, because the enemy had suddenly attacked and the main general was not in the tent, the 5-star army had taken advantage of the situation and caught him off guard. However, now that he was here, the 5-star army still dared to come. Weren't they courting death? How many people did they send? Tung Mushi's expression was a little sinister as he asked with a murderous aura. Reporting to General, the enemy has about 4,000 people. Although the scout did not want to say this number, he had to report it truthfully because of his duty. 4,000. 4,000, haha. When he heard that there were only 4,000 cavalrymen, Tung Mushi could not help but laugh out loud. He had already retired from the army and returned home to live in peace for many years. How could his army be looked down upon like this? Currently, he still had 40,000 cavalrymen in his tent. If he included Tushi's cavalrymen, it would be a total of 55,000 people. The enemy only had 4,000 cavalrymen. How could they dare to provoke him? They were truly overestimating themselves. Or did they have something to rely on? At this moment, Tung Mushi fully displayed the demeanor of an experienced general. He quickly calmed down and waved his hand towards the generals in the tent. Let's go and see if this so-called 1st Cavalry Division really has 3 heads and 6 arms. Is it really invulnerable to swords and spears? The generals have been suppressing the anger in their hearts for a long time. The 5-star army's cavalrymen actually chose to attack when they were not in the camp. This made them think that the enemy was afraid of them. They believed that if they were in the camp earlier, the outcome of the battle would have been different. Now, it was time to let the 5-star army know how powerful they were. Tung Mushi took the lead, and the other generals walked out of the tent. They rode their horses to the outskirts of the camp. From afar, they could see the 5-star flag fluttering in the wind. Although they were still far away, those who could become generals were all veterans. How could they not see through the enemy's strength? When they saw that the 5-star army only had around 4,000 people, they were all shocked. Could it be that they didn't know that there was a huge difference in strength between the two sides? Could it be that they had really come to throw their lives away? After the shock, everyone's gaze landed on great General Tung Mushi. At this moment, Tung Mushi was emitting an indescribable anger. In his view, this was a provocation from the 5-star army. It was also a type of blasphemy. It was a type of disrespect to the cavalrymen. Since you want to die so much, I will let you know the price of doing so. Come, which general is willing to lead the troops to battle? Tung Mushi shouted in anger. This general is willing to go. A burly warrior stood up. His name was Mo Ku, and he was a famous general in the Ili army. He was also one of the young men that Tung Mushi valued the most. Good. General Mo Ku is extremely courageous. I'll give you 5,000 cavalry. No matter what, you must eliminate the enemy in the shortest time possible. Tung Mushi's gaze landed on Mo Ku's face. There was excitement and expectation in his eyes. Understood. Mo Ku immediately cupped his fists in acknowledgement and went to gather the troops. The 5,000 cavalry were quickly prepared. Soon after, the war drum sounded. Mo Ku, who had shouted the word kill, took the lead and led the 5,000 cavalry to charge towards the 5-star military formation. Tushi appeared beside General Tung Mushi at some point in time and looked over. He did not know that the Ili army's 3 defensive lines had been broken. Thus, he was curious about what the 4,000 cavalrymen of the 5-star army wanted to do. Were they here to die? He envied Tung Mushi's good luck. There were actually people who took the initiative to come and die. If such a thing happened to him, how good would it be? It would be a great contribution. Tushi looked at Tung Mushi with envy. However, he quickly put away those thoughts. In his gaze, he saw the Ili army cavalrymen fall from their horses as if they were under a spell. Even the brave warrior, Emo, who only struggled for a moment before falling to the ground. After leaving behind nearly 2,000 corpses, the 5,000 cavalrymen retreated in less than an hour. From the moment they started to retreat, they did not even touch the blades of the 5-star army's cavalrymen. It's a crossbow. They have a weapon that can shoot crossbows continuously. One of the generals was very observant. He finally discovered the source of the problem and immediately shouted out loud, "A weapon that can shoot crossbows continuously." Tung Mushi's eyes lit up when he heard that. This was definitely a good thing. Once the elite army was equipped with such a weapon, where in the world could they not go? Who would be a match for them? He originally thought that the 5-star army was here to die. He did not expect that they would have such a weapon. Tung Mushi finally understood the whole story. Presumably, this was also the reason why the other 3 lines were broken in such a short time. The enemy has a crossbow that can shoot crossbows continuously. Tushi also heard the shout, and his eyes lit up. Excitement enveloped his entire body. He was thinking that if he could snatch these crossbow bolts and present them to the king, it would definitely be a great merit. His position in the army would also rise. What a happy and glorious thing it would be. After a few breaths, he made up his mind. He must snatch these crossbow tools. Even if he could only get a third of them, it would definitely be a great merit. Old General Tung. This one is not talented and cannot bear to see the elite army suffer losses. I am willing to lead the army forward and make a military pledge that we will not return without victory. Chapter 1260. Tushi volunteered to fight not because he thought the 5-star army was easy to bully, but because he was so captivated by the 7-star crossbow that he forgot all the dangers. How could such a small trick escape Tung Mushi's sharp eyes? How was he asking to fight? He was clearly trying to steal the credit. He was just spying on the 7-star crossbow. Since that was the case, how could he let such a good thing fall into his opponent's hands? It was true that they were allied forces now, but once the 5-star army was defeated and retreated, they would naturally still be enemies since they were all living in this place. Even if it was for the future, he could not let such a good thing fall into his hands. Cough, General Tushi, you just came from afar and haven't had a good rest. How can you fight now? Without waiting for Tung Mushi to finish, Tushi interrupted. How can we rest when dealing with the invading 5-star army? Our Torpon cavalry wants to do our part. I hope old General Tung can fulfill our wish. He even brought out the banner of the Torpon army to pressure Tung Mushi. It could be imagined that if he did not let Tushi fight, even if they won this battle, Tushi would probably complain to the 5-star army and point out his faults. Now is not the time to split. The most important thing was that the Big Dipper crossbows were indeed powerful. Someone needed to bear the risk. Seeing Tushi's firm attitude, Tung Mushi hesitated for a moment before nodding. Fine. However, according to the ratio, you can only send out 5,000 cavalrymen at most. Too many won't do. 5,000 was a little too little. Based on Tushi's intentions, it would be better if the entire army was mobilized. However, Tung Mushi had already made a concession. If he did not agree and angered Tung Mushi, he would not even have the chance to send out troops. Tung Mushi had no choice but to agree. All right, 5,000 it is. I will go back and prepare. After Tushi left, Tung Mushi took the opportunity to give orders to the other generals. After naming 3 generals and giving each of them 5,000 cavalrymen, a confident smile appeared on his face again. His 15,000 cavalrymen and Tushi's 5,000 cavalrymen made a total of 20,000 cavalrymen, 5 times the number of the enemy. Even if the enemy had a powerful killing weapon like the Big Dipper crossbow, the advantage of numbers was not for nothing. He was confident that the victory of this battle would belong to him. About half an hour later, General Tushi arrived with 5,000 cavalrymen he had personally selected. These were the elites of the 15,000 cavalrymen. He had already instructed them that killing the enemy was secondary. The most important thing was to seize the enemy's crossbow weapons. Whoever seized one would be rewarded with a great merit and would be promoted by 3 ranks and rewarded with 100 taels of silver. Opposite Ely Bailey's army was Tamu-Er's regiment, which was personally led by Division Commander Tian-Hu. Tamu-Er had just defeated 5,000 of the enemy's cavalry and killed 2,000 of them. Clearly, he was still not satisfied. At this moment, he saw that the enemy was constantly mobilizing their troops, but no one was rushing out. He said anxiously, "Master, why aren't they coming out? Are they really afraid?" "Haha, of course they are afraid, but they will also come out. We only have 4,000 cavalry. This is why they are confident that they can win. As for why they are not attacking now, it is because they are mobilizing their troops. First Regiment Commander, inform the soldiers to check their weapons. The battle is about to begin." Things were as Tian-Hu had guessed. After the 15,000 cavalry from Ibali and the 5,000 cavalry from Tuliefin had gathered, they opened the gates of the main camp, and the 20,000 cavalry marched out. From afar, they looked very imposing. If it was any other army with only 4,000 cavalry, they would have been so scared that their legs would have turned to jelly. How could they still talk about fighting? However, when the same thing happened to the soldiers of Ibali's army, their eyes were wide open and filled with murderous intent. They were the strongest cavalry in the world. They had the most powerful weapon in their hands, the 7-star crossbow. This was what they were relying on. So what if the enemy outnumbered them by 5-1? In a war, it was not certain who had more people. If that was the case, wouldn't the great Ming Empire already be #1 in the world? Moreover, these 4,000 cavalrymen were not alone. The other 3 regiments were also on their way. So much time had passed, and they would arrive at any moment. Once the main forces converged, they would no longer be defending, but attacking with all their might. At that time, the world's #1 cavalry division would create another miracle on the battlefield. The 20,000 cavalry of the Allied army leaped out and began to form up in front of the main camp. After all, there were too many people, and the distance between the two sides was only 3 li. If they did not form up properly, they would not be able to charge out. Just like that, after the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn, the 20,000 cavalry formed a fan that was 10 li wide. Just like that, all 20,000 cavalry were sent out of the main camp. After the battle formation was set up, under Tung Mushi's orders, the war drums were beaten and the earth shook. "Everyone, listen to my orders. In this battle, no one is allowed to retreat before the gong sounds. Otherwise, you will be punished as a traitor." Before charging out, Tung Mushi had learned his lesson from the previous incident. He shouted loudly. In his opinion, the most difficult thing to do when facing the 7-star crossbow was to get close to the enemy. Once the two sides started fighting, their advantage in numbers would be displayed to the greatest extent. At that time, victory would belong to them. On the other hand, if everyone retreated, they would never be able to get close to the enemy. They would only become live targets and would not be able to escape the fate of being shot. Only advance and not retreat. This was the order that Tung Mushi gave to the 20,000 cavalry. Then, the war drums sounded and the 20,000 cavalry launched a fierce charge on the ground that was 10 li wide. The war horses raised their hooves, kicking up countless snowflakes on the ground. At this moment, the world seemed to have turned into a vast expanse of white. It was so white that tens of meters away became a blind spot. "Division Master, the enemy has finally launched an attack." Tamu-Er's face was filled with excitement. "Pass down the order. Split into companies and spread out on the same spot. Kill any enemy that tries to get close. At the same time, retreat as you fight. Don't fight head-on." Tian-Hu gave an order. After all, the disparity in numbers was too great. Once the enemy got close to them, it would be the first cavalry division's misfortune. Yes, although Tamu-Er also wanted to fight to his heart's content with the enemy, he also knew that the bigger picture was more important. There was no doubt that Tian-Hu's order was the most appropriate at the moment. While the enemy's line of sight was obstructed, they could change their battle formation. Pass down the order. Split into companies and get into a crossbow attack formation. Spread out quickly and retreat as you fight. Don't get close to the enemy. After Tamu-Er gave the order, the well-trained 4,000 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division immediately split into 40 small teams. The distance between each team was not far, and the battle line was constantly widening. The Alliance army charging from afar did not know this. They only knew that the enemy was right in front of them. As long as they could charge through the enemy's crossbow formation and engage in close combat, victory would definitely belong to them. Therefore, at this moment, there was only one thought in their minds, and that was to charge. Under the galloping of tens of thousands of horses, the rumbling sound was incessant. It was as if an earthquake was about to happen. The rumbling sound filled the ears of every rider. At this moment, everyone seemed to have forgotten about life and death. They only charged out of instinct. The distance of only 3 miles was nothing to the cavalry. As they got closer and closer to the 5-star army's camp, the sound of crossbow arrows piercing through the air came one after another. With their line of sight obstructed, the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division released their crossbows purely out of instinct. As long as they saw a moving figure rushing towards them, they would pull the trigger. The other soldiers hurriedly reloaded their crossbows when they had the time to ensure that their weapons could continuously attack and kill. Snow swirled in the air and blood splattered everywhere. There was a hint of red in the white and a hint of white in the red. This was like a painting, a ticket to hell. Amidst the snow, there were only flying crossbow arrows, flashing figures, and the urgent beating of the drums that they had to hear even if they didn't want to hear it. As they madly charged forward, they continuously retreated and released their crossbows, playing the battle song near the Ayla Mountain Pass. How is it? How is it? In the Alliance Army's camp, Tushi was anxiously looking around. Unfortunately, under the heavy snow, he could not see anything. On the other hand, General Tingmuxi, who was not far from him, was obviously much calmer. He only squinted his eyes as he looked at the scene in front of him. General Tingmuxi had been on the battlefield for a long time. He had spent his entire life in blood and fire and was used to seeing big scenes. He had even commanded bigger battles before. However, he did not know why, but at this moment, he was a little flustered. Perhaps it was because he could not see the situation clearly, or perhaps it was because he was afraid and did not understand the 7-star crossbow. As the saying goes, ignorance is the scariest. This is the truth. The battle was still going on. It had already been going on for close to an hour. The army had already gone far away. Other than the heavy snow under the hoof prints, nothing else could be seen. Why does it seem like they are moving towards us? It was unknown which young general said this unintentionally. It was this sentence that attracted everyone's attention. When everyone looked carefully, they discovered that the white snowflakes were indeed moving towards them. What's going on? What's going on? It was still Tushi who was the first to shout. If one listened carefully to his voice, they would be able to feel that at this moment, he was more or less panicking. General Tingmuxi was still squinting his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. After a dozen breaths, when the snowflakes were less than 2 li away from their camp, he suddenly opened his eyes wide and roared, "Not good! Immediately close the camp gate! Close the camp gate!" Chapter 1261. In his nervousness, he shouted twice, but it was still the same order. Even so, the generals and soldiers at the side were still in a daze. They did not know why the old general would give such an order, and no one carried it out. "Bastard, why aren't you closing the gate? The enemy cavalry is coming." Seeing that no one was carrying out his orders, Tungmu, she became truly angry. He shouted loudly once again, "Stop it! Stop it!" Not only that, Tungmushi personally rode his horse and rushed to the camp 100 meters away. He reached out his hand to close the wooden gate. As expected of an experienced general, Tungmushi's observation skills were extraordinary. Things were just as he said. The snowballs that were moving over were the main forces of the 1st Heaven Cavalry Division that were approaching from afar. Just a moment ago, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Regiments had finished their respective battles and finally joined forces with the 5th Regiment. After a series of crossbow bolts, the cavalry of the Ely Army, which had been mostly wiped out by the 5th Regiment, was finally defeated. Then, under the command of Division Commander Tian Hu, they charged in the direction of the Ely Cavalry Division's camp. Due to the heavy snowfall, all the soldiers were covered in a layer of white snow, which made it the best camouflage. Even though they were very close to each other, the enemy did not raise any vigilance. If Tingmushi had not been fighting for a lifetime and had a natural insight and judgment on the battlefield, he would not have been able to make such a judgment. Unfortunately, although he had seen through it, because of the lack of time, no one carried out his order. He might as well use his actions to prove everything. General Tingmushi was best at defense, and this camp was run by him like an iron bucket. Once the gate was closed, even if the world's #1 army wanted to enter, they would have to pay a heavy price. Xiao, Tingmushi, who was using all his strength to push the wooden gate, suddenly froze when he heard this sound. Then, blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. An arrow came from afar and hit him in the back. Although it was not fatal, it drained a lot of his strength and injured him. Old General. The scene of Tingmushi standing in front of the wooden door after being hit by the arrow was seen by many people. At this moment, everyone finally regained their senses and understood why the old general had given such an order. However, the best opportunity had already been missed, and it was too late to remedy it now. On the battlefield, any change could directly determine the outcome of the battle. Just like at this moment, when everyone was riding their horses towards the wooden door, a few more crossbow bolts flew through the air. When they were less than 120 steps away, almost all of the bolts hit their targets. Tingmushi's back was like a hedgehog that was pierced by the bolts. His body twitched and stopped several times. Protect the old general. Finally, a fast general and soldier reached Tingmushi's side. They wanted to reach out and pull out the arrow on his back, but they were stopped by Tingmushi, who seemed to have regained consciousness before his death. Don't worry about me. Hurry and retreat. We cannot fight the enemy. You have to think of a way to bring more soldiers back. After exhausting the last of his strength, Tingmushi breathed his last on the spot after saying those words. At this moment, the old general that he had painstakingly invited returned to the earth and was buried in the snow. With Tingmushi's death, the 1st Cavalry Division also rushed to the front of the large tent. Following that, a dense rain of crossbow bolts shot and killed about 300 cavalrymen on the spot, as well as more than 20 high-ranking generals. Watching this scene from 100 meters away, Tushi's expression changed drastically. In his panic, he kept shouting, hold on for me." After shouting these words, he turned and fled. He did not even care about the army, and only brought a few dozen of his personal guards to escape from the back of the camp. Tushi was not the only one who fled. Some soldiers who reacted quickly also saw that the 1st Cavalry Division's cavalrymen had already rushed into the large tent. When they saw the sky full of crossbow bolts shooting from afar, and when they saw that the cavalrymen in front of them did not even have the chance to wave their swords before they were killed by the bolts, the entire camp was in chaos. With the death of their general, the morale of the army was completely destroyed. The remaining 35,000 cavalrymen of the Alliance army fled in all directions like stray dogs. At this moment, they only hated the fact that their war horses only had 4 legs and were running too slowly. Split up and chase. The 2nd Cavalry Division will stay behind to clean up the battlefield. Tianhu rode a tall horse into the camp. When he saw the corpses of the enemy cavalrymen who had died from the crossbow bolts, as well as the captive cavalrymen who had already knelt down and surrendered, he immediately gave the order to fight. The 2nd Cavalry Division's mission was the most important. They had paid the most to deal with the 20,000 elite cavalrymen north of the Ala Mountain Pass. At this moment, they naturally had to stay behind to clean up the battlefield. In the 1st Cavalry Division, Tianhu's orders were equivalent to Yang Chendong's orders. No one dared to disobey. Immediately, other than the 1st, 3rd, and 5th Cavalry Divisions that went in 3 different directions to chase after the enemy, the only ones left in the camp were the 2nd Cavalry Division soldiers, the captives, and the corpses of the Alliance army. Of course, because they had been defeated too quickly and too hastily, the Ili army's money, rations, and weapons were all left in the camp for future translocations. When the 2nd Cavalry Division's Lu Duo saw the large storehouse, he excitedly came to Tiger's Mane. Division Commander, the money, rations, and supplies are all here. We did not lose anything. These things are enough for our division to eat for a year. Good. Send a report of victory to the 6th young master. At the same time, ask for instructions on what to do with these spoils. Tian, whose face was filled with satisfaction. With the help of the Big Dipper crossbow, they had made a name for themselves as the #1 cavalry division in the world. From now on, whenever they mentioned their army, their enemies would be afraid of them. The heavy snow still showed no signs of stopping. The 5-star army used the heavy snow to achieve their goal of surprise attack. At the same time, many of the Alliance Army's cavalrymen also used the heavy snow to escape. The heavy snow quickly covered the tracks of their fleeing horses, so the pursuit was not too smooth. Even so, when the final results were tallied, they still managed to kill more than 13,000 enemies and capture 40,000 enemies. This meant that out of the 95,000 enemies, not even half of them had escaped. Among them, more than 30,000 of the Ely army had escaped, more than 10,000 of the Turpan cavalry had escaped, and the rest were either stragglers or deserters whose whereabouts were unknown. When the telegram was sent to Yang Chendong, who was in the Turpan palace, he couldn't help but laugh. Not bad. Tian, who didn't let me down, and the 1st Cavalry Division didn't let me down either. Reply: the 1st Cavalry Division has collectively achieved first-class merit. Order them to be on standby and wait for the rear army to take over. Yes. Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, excitedly replied, then turned around and strode away. Yang Chendong, who was left behind, looked in the direction of the tower outside the palace and muttered in his heart, "Bullshit 5-star army. I'm fighting the Alliance army." On the tower outside the city, the siege continued. It was personally led by He Kagan, who had his nose dug out by the 5-star army. It seemed that he wanted to take revenge for the humiliation of that day. Under his organization, the momentum of the siege was very fierce. Often, when a 1,000-man team was beaten back, another 1,000-man team would take their place and charge forward. They had been fighting for half a month, and the 10,000 infantrymen in his hands had been used up. Now, the ones charging were the 5-star army, which had changed from cavalry to infantry. It seemed that everyone knew what it meant to take down Turpan City. Each country took out 5,000 soldiers who had changed from cavalry to infantry and handed them over to He Kagan to command. This made the siege even more fierce. Not only that, Yesen also used all the cannons he had obtained over the years, either by robbing or buying. They gathered them together and attacked the West Tower fiercely, as if they wanted to destroy the city. The Baiming army's cannons were naturally not as powerful as Yang Chendong's cannons, but their power was not to be underestimated. The bombardment that had been going on since yesterday had indeed caused a lot of pressure and damage to the defense of Turpan City. When Beta Persei heard the sound of the cannons, he personally went to the tower. After seeing that many of the walls had been blown open, his face was full of worry. This won't do. If this goes on, it's only a matter of time before the city falls. For the sake of the young master's safety, I have to force it. Beta Persei, who had gone down the tower, had already made up his mind. He must take Yang Chendong away from here. He believed that with nearly 20,000 Mongolian cavalry and 2,000 strong black cavalry, if they suddenly attacked at this time, there was still a high chance that they could escape. As long as the young master was fine, even if they lost Turpan City, what was the big deal? Beta Persei, who had made up his mind, first went to find General Song and the Black Cavalry's 1st Brigade leader Chiu Vi and 2nd Brigade leader Dao Shao. The 4 of them quickly came to a consensus and then went to the palace. When they arrived at the palace, they could not find Yang Chendong. After asking some people, they found out that Bugnam of Gojoseon was in the back room. Let's go to the back room. After Beta Persei asked for the location, he went to the back room with everyone. When they arrived, they saw the Black Cavalry's 1st Brigade Deputy Brigade leader Ba Daojiang commanding the people to carry something out of the back room. What's going on? Beta Persei and the others still did not see Yang Chendong and could not help but ask in confusion. Oh, the sixth young master is commanding everyone to carry the cannons outside. Huh. At this moment, Ba Daojiang's face was filled with an excited smile. At this moment, a gust of wind blew by and blew a piece of black cloth off, revealing the pitch-black 100mm mortar underneath. Chapter 1262. Artillery. It's a 100mm mortar. As the two captains of the Black Cavalry, Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao, were naturally very familiar with such things. Beta Persei, the sixth young master, is calling for you. Peng Yu, the captain of the first squad, walked through the Black Cavalry and arrived in front of Beta Persei with a trace of respect on his face. At this moment, Beta Persei was also confused. He didn't remember when there were any artillery in this warehouse, but these things really did appear. What's going on? With extreme puzzlement, Beta Persei followed behind Peng Yu and walked into the warehouse. Behind him, Qiu Vi, Dao Xiao, Na Ri Song, and the others couldn't help but shake their heads. Second brother, what are you doing? We also have artillery, many times more advanced than the enemy. What are you nervous about? That's right, that's right. Come on, let's continue to defend the city and wait for the artillery to be ready. Let's give the enemy a good look, haha. The three officers with the rank of senior colonel laughed and left without waiting for Beta Persei to return. At this time, in the warehouse, Beta Persei was listening to Yang Chendong's teachings. Not bad, Beta Persei. This time, you and Yang Si are well prepared. You knew to bring some artillery to the city in advance. Although there are only 2, the number of shells is really enough. You guys have done a good job. When Yang Chendong saw Beta Persei appear with a confused look, he didn't wait for the other party to speak and spoke first. After saying this, Yang Chendong still didn't give Beta Persei a chance to ask questions and continued. With these 200mm mortars, it shouldn't be a problem to deal with the artillery outside the city. Well, I know you really want to shoot the artillery, so I'll leave this task to you. You don't have any other questions, do you? This so-called other question naturally referred to why the cannons appeared here. Beta Persei had been by Yang Chendong's side for the longest time. He didn't learn anything else, but he had picked up some intelligence. He immediately understood the meaning behind Zhang Heng's words. Although he was also very puzzled as to how these cannons appeared here, he couldn't stop the excitement of wanting to shoot them. He immediately nodded and agreed. Young master, these 2 cannons were indeed transported all the way here after I contacted Yang Si. It's just that I forgot about it, because of the urgency of the war. Please punish me. No man is a saint. How can there be no mistakes? All right, I forgive you. Go and fiddle with your cannons. Remember, don't waste a single shell. Knowing that Beta Persei understood the meaning of his words, Yang Chendong chuckled and waved his hand. Beta Persei left excitedly. To him, it didn't matter how the cannons appeared here. Speaking of which, how many miracles did the sixth young master bring to him? What he was more excited and looking forward to now was the opportunity to shoot the artillery. As soon as the sound of the artillery was heard, the enemy would be dizzy. Seeing Beta Persei leave excitedly, Yang Chendong let out a sigh of relief. He had no choice but to take out 2 100mm mortars from the large warehouse. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to defend Tuliefan City. Fortunately, Beta Persei was not an outsider. Although he would have some guesses after doing this, he would never speak carelessly. Yang Chendong was still confident about this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kept this person by his side for so long. With Beta Persei standing up for him, no one would doubt the origin of these cannons. He could also breathe a sigh of relief and return to the palace to take care of the formation. As for whether the appearance of the 100mm mortars would reverse the situation, Yang Chendong was not worried at all. If he couldn't defend Tuliefan City, even after taking out such a trump card, he might as well stop the expansion and immediately return to Qiqian City to retire. Outside Tuliefan City, the scene of artillery fire was still raging. When they saw pieces of the city wall peeling off as the cannons fired, the generals of the Five-Nation Coalition laughed heartily. Originally, It should have been easy to take down Turpan City, which was only guarded by 20,000 cavalry. They had the advantage of military strength, plus the people in the city knew that they were coming, so they should have responded. Under internal and external troubles, Hikagan gave him 3 days at the earliest. He was confident that he would be able to take down Turpan City in 3 days at the latest. But when it came to fighting, it was completely different. At some point, many young men in civilian clothes suddenly appeared on the city gate tower. They actually raised pillows, pushed boulders, and splashed kerosene to counterattack. At first, Hikagan wanted to stop the attack. He thought that the people were forced to do so by the 5-star army. He shouted loudly, telling the people not to listen to the 5-star army. He even urged them to open the city gate from the inside and let them in. However, such shouts were quickly suppressed by the bows and arrows of the Mongolian soldiers, led by Narasong. If it wasn't for the distance, one of the arrows could have hit Hikagan. This angered the other party. Hikagan loudly shouted that these people were fools. He also said that once the city was breached, he would teach these people a lesson for helping the 5-star army defend the city. This was like poking a hornet's nest. Originally, the people only worked for the sake of money, but now they had no choice but to fight for themselves. Perhaps after the city tower was breached, the people who helped to defend the city might not be exterminated. However, there was one thing that could not be changed, and that was that the money they had received would be taken back. How could they give back what they had received? Just based on this, the benefits of these people were completely tied to the 5-star army. At this moment, they had no other choice. They could only fight to the death. When they saw the enemy's cannons continuously bombarding the city gate tower, the destruction was extremely great. The skin of the city walls was peeling off, and a hole was about to be blasted open. Many of the people defending the city became nervous. Right now, they were just like the 5-star army. In fact, they were even more anxious than the 5-star army. This was because once the city gate was breached, the 5-star army could still charge out. However, they would not even have the chance to escape. Thus, many of the people went to the palace together. They were prepared to petition Bugnam of Gojoseon and ask him to protect the city. For this, these people were willing to do their best. On their way forward, they happened to see young Air and the others carrying 2 pitch-black iron objects, as well as several large wooden chests, out of the city. "What are you doing?" Seeing so many people blocking the way, and most of them were young men, Beta Persei frowned slightly. With a wave of his right hand, the 500 black cavalry immediately spread out in a defensive formation. These 2 cannons and 20 boxes of ammunition were treasures in Beta Persei's eyes. He would never allow anyone to have any ideas about them. The murderous aura of the black cavalry immediately shocked the people on the opposite side. They were all at a loss for what to do, and some didn't know what to do. Fortunately, there were still some bold people in the crowd, such as the young man Tomu, who had repeatedly performed well. He wasn't so scared that he didn't dare to make a sound, but his voice wasn't very loud either. "General, what are you doing? Don't worry about what we're doing. Let me ask, what are you doing? You're called Tomu, right? I'll let you say it." Beta Persei still remembered this young Turpan man who had performed well on the first day and immediately pointed to him. Now that he had a chance to speak, Tomu told the truth. "General, the city is in danger. We want to petition Bugnam of Gojoseon and ask him to send troops to defend the city." Hearing that they wanted to petition to defend the city and not have any ideas about his cannons, Beta Persei's expression immediately became much better. "Oh, so that's what you mean. Okay, then you don't have to go. Didn't you ask us what we were doing just now? Then I can answer you now. Do you see what we're moving? These are cannons, specially used to help everyone defend the city." Cannons? They're so small. Although Beta Persei's words were very confident, in the eyes of these young people, they were not very optimistic. They had seen the cannons of the 5-nation coalition army on the city tower before. Each one was bigger than the other, and their power was so amazing. The 2 cannons in front of them were so small that 2 people could carry them. They really couldn't imagine how powerful they could be. At this moment, Beta Persei didn't know whether to cry or laugh at being underestimated. Okay, there's no need to explain anything to you now. Just watch our actual actions in a while. Come on, let's move on. Some things could not be described with words, just like the power of a 100mm mortar. But Beta Persei believed that once the cannons were fired, the power they emitted would definitely shock everyone. At that time, facts would be more effective than 1,000 words. Beta Persei said so confidently that the people could only follow behind him, regardless of whether they believed it or not. They soon arrived at the West City Gate, then began to set up the cannons and adjust the cannon ruler. Beta Persei personally did the work of adjusting the cannon ruler. He was one of Yang Qindong's direct disciples. He really put a lot of effort into it. Now was the time to put it into practice. How could he let others do it? Everyone looked on helplessly as Yang Air stretched out his thumb and measured the direction of the wind. He was so busy that he couldn't be happier. At the wall artillery position outside the West City Gate, all 100 cannons were placed here at the moment. It was obvious that Yeshen was going all out to take down Turpan City. In his opinion, this was an excellent opportunity to capture Yang Qindong alive. He would never miss it. Chapter 1263. In order to prevent the enemy from abandoning the city and fleeing, under his coordination, every gate of the city was guarded by the cavalry of the 5 allied nations. This was to ensure that the 5-star army would either not leave the city, or once they left the city, they would be stopped and intercepted by the strongest forces. Yang Qindong, oh Yang Qindong, let's see where you can escape to this time. Continue to fire the cannons. Blast them to death. Yeshen rode on his horse, his voice carrying a murderous aura, but his face was full of joy. It was obvious that he was very satisfied with the current situation. Just like how Yang Qindong was sent to rescue the 1st Cavalry Division at the Ala Mountain Pass, Yeshen's move of sending his 100,000 troops was not just to defeat the 5-star army. Can't he see that Yang Qindong is dividing the combat power of the 5-star army? But he did it anyway, so that he could surround Turpan and give himself a chance to take the head of the general in the midst of an army of 10,000. Now that the opportunity was about to present itself, how could he not be excited? How could he not be excited? How could he not be happy? The cannons were still firing. Due to some quality issues, more than 10 of the 100 cannons had been turned into duds, and a dozen more were about to come to an end. However, he didn't care about these things. All he wanted was to take down Turpan City and kill Yang Qindong. Of course, it would be best if he could capture him alive. He could probably exchange this person for a lot of good things that he wanted. At that time, without the 5-star army holding him back, he would be invincible on the grasslands once again. It was unknown what he thought of, but a smile flashed across his face. At this moment, he also had the potential to become a mental patient, to the extent that when the deputy generals at his side saw this appearance, they unknowingly distanced themselves a bit, each of them carrying a cautious expression on their faces. Inside the city, after a series of operations, Yang Air was ready to fire the cannons. He chuckled and waved at the Black Knight Dragon Guards not far away. Come on, bring me a box of cannonballs. These were the treasures of the 5-star army. Due to the lack of technology and raw materials, the production of cannonballs had always been extremely complicated. It was already considered good if 2 or 3 out of 10 cannonballs were up to standard. There might even be some duds, which was something that couldn't be bought with money. This was also one of the main reasons why the 5-star army had to increase the number of cavalry units. Once cannonballs could be used freely one day, it would be much easier for them to fight battles. There were 6 cannonballs in one box, a total of 10 boxes. Looking at the golden cannonballs, Beta Persei had a dazed look on his face. Brothers, it's up to you. Don't let them be duds. Of course, Beta Persei did not know that these were all taken out by Yang Qindong from the big warehouse. There was no problem with their quality, and it was even more impossible for them to be duds. Fire! Under Beta Persei's shout, the cannonball was loaded into the barrel. Then, with a long whistle, a seemingly invisible flame rushed out of the barrel and shot towards the Walla army's artillery positions outside the city. Compared to the beaming red barbarian cannons that could only hit 200 to 300 meters away, the mortar cannons had a range that could kill the enemy in minutes. It was like a knife versus a pair of scissors. They were not on the same level at all. The Walla artillery positions outside the city were surrounded by majestic Walla cavalry. Considering the power of the cannons and the threat they posed to Turpan's towers, Yesen ordered more than once that they had to be on high alert. They had to be constantly on guard against the five-star army's cavalry rushing out. Once this place was destroyed, they would lose a very important trump card. Therefore, those who were assigned to stand guard here were all elite veterans with eagle eyes, the strength of a bear, and the morale of a tiger. But even if they were powerful cavalry, in the face of the cannons falling from the sky, they had no effect at all. The so-called defense was just like paper. When the cannonball fell, they didn't even have time to react or dodge, because no one thought that there would be cannons in Turpan, and they didn't even know how much more advanced they had. Whoosh boom! The cannonball fell from the sky and accurately landed in the center of the red barbarian cannons. With a deafening sound, the cannons at the landing point were immediately sent flying into the air. When they fell to the ground, they had already become a pile of scrap metal. The explosion quickly formed a large pothole. The snow on the ground, the stones on the ground, and the soil on the ground were also lifted up, flying in all directions and exploding. Some of the Walla cavalry that were closer were also unlucky and fell to the ground. They were blown away by the shockwave. A rumbling sound echoed in his ears and woke up Yesen, who was still dreaming. His hands trembled and he almost fell off his horse. After he finally calmed himself down, he asked anxiously, "What's going on? Did the cannons explode?" In the past, there were red barbarian cannons. Because of the quality of the cannons, they suddenly exploded and injured a few cavalry. So he instinctively thought in this direction. Leader, it wasn't an explosion. The cannons fired by the five-star army landed in the center of the red barbarian cannons. We lost 6 cannons in an instant. A general in charge of the safety of the cannons ran in front of Yesen with a bitter face. His duty was to protect the safety of the cannons, but he could only defend against the cannons on the ground. His main duty was to prevent the five-star army cavalry from charging out of the city. He didn't expect to be able to defend against the cannonballs falling from the sky. That was definitely not the area they could defend against. Looking at the general's crying face, Yesen asked in shock, "What? You said the five-star army also has cannons? How is that possible?" Yesen instinctively shouted this sentence. In his opinion, if the five-star army really had cannons, they would have used them a long time ago. Why would they wait until now? But thinking about it, weren't firearms one of the most important reasons why the five-star army was so strong? Since he could get his hands on 100 red barbarian cannons, how could the enemy not have them? In his heart, he hated Yang Qindong's calmness. Only now did he take out the cannons and use them. He really could keep his composure. But because of this, he was even more happy as he analyzed. Looks like the five-star army is really at their wits' end. They even use cannons. Looks like this is their last resort. This way, they won't have too many cannons. Find the location of the enemy's cannons and destroy them. When that time comes, let's see how they will fight against us. Yesen believed that Turpan's defense had reached its most critical point. If not, they wouldn't have used their trump card, the cannons. Because of this, he concluded that the defense had reached its most critical point. Now, it was up to them to destroy the enemy's cannons and regain the initiative. That's right, the five-star army only had 2 cannons. Compared to the number of cannons, it was a lot less. However, the quality of the cannons was much higher. They were small, accurate, powerful, and had a long range. How could Baiming's clumsy red barbarian cannons compare to them? The so-called cannon general listened to Yesen's order, and his face became even more bitter. He wanted to say that he didn't see the location of the five-star army's cannons. He only heard the sound, and his cannons were seriously damaged. He didn't even see the enemy's shadow at all. But he didn't dare to say these words because he found that Yesen was already in a rage. If he dared to say this at this time, he was afraid that he would die before the cannons were destroyed. Yes, I will try my best. He didn't say anything, but he had to obey. The cannon general agreed and rushed towards the cannons again. At this time, in Turpan, the observation soldiers on the city gate tower had already passed on the news that 6 of the enemy's cannons were destroyed in one shot. It immediately caused a burst of exclamations and shouts of excitement from the crowd. Seeing how excited the people around him were, and how they were looking at him with envy and admiration, young heir's heart was filled with joy. Come, I'll show everyone the power of our cannons again. Whoosh boom, whoosh whoosh, boom boom boom. As if it was smooth sailing, golden cannonballs blasted out and landed on Yeshin's cannons. The cannons that couldn't find their opponents in time became fixed targets and were quickly hit one by one. One of the cannonballs unfortunately fell on the ammunition box next to the cannons and immediately caused a second explosion. The destruction caused in that instant destroyed the remaining beaming red barbarian cannons. Not only that, dozens of cavalrymen around were not much better. They were injured by iron shrapnel and fell off their horses one by one. The cannons became a sea of fire and then became a ruin. Without the support of the cannons, the siege couldn't help but stagnate. More young men and women of Turpan rushed up the city gate tower again, using the advantage of the high ground to launch a strong counterattack. What's going on? Hikijin asked the others to command in his place, then came in front of Yeshin and asked aloud. There was no need for an answer. Just by looking at the sea of fire that was still burning, it was clear at a glance. Are the cannons of the 5-star army that powerful? Did anyone see where they came from? Will they still fire at us? In a short period of time, Hikijin asked 3 consecutive questions. The first question naturally didn't need to be answered. Facts spoke louder than words. The second question was basically answered. The cannons came from within the city. Just from this point alone, the attack range of the 5-star army's cannons couldn't be compared to the destroyed red barbarian cannons in their hands. As for the third question, no one could answer. Perhaps only Yang Qindong knew whether the 5-star army would fire or not. Chapter 1264. Hikagen's expression turned ugly when he didn't receive any news. He originally thought that victory was in the bag. With the addition of the cannons, he was even more certain of victory. However, as the 5-star army started using cannons, the outcome became uncertain. Why don't we retreat first? This Turpan city is a tough nut to crack. Why don't we find a chance to fight them on the plains? After a short moment of silence, Kazakhstan's KLA tentatively expressed his opinion. He had already received information that an elite force of the 5-star army was approaching Turpan city. At the same time, the battle at the Ayla mountain pass that was previously agreed upon did not seem to be going well. This made him realize how strong the enemy was. No wonder they needed the 5-star army to fight. Of course, if KLA knew that the so-called battle was already in name only. Apart from the 100,000 Walla army that could still hold on, the other 3 armies had already been defeated. He probably wouldn't have asked this tentatively. Instead, he would have made this suggestion without hesitation. After all, they had worked so hard for so long. Moreover, after the bombardment of Turpan city, there were indeed some areas that were in danger of collapsing. It would be a pity to give up now. In the end, Hikagen, who had an extreme personality, or perhaps it was more accurate to say that he hated the 5-star army to the bone, made the final decision. Continue to attack. Attack for 3 more days. If it still doesn't work, then we can retreat. After working so hard for so long and seeing that success was at hand, he was unwilling to retreat now. Because of this, he thoroughly hated the citizens of Turpan. This was because he had already discovered that it was these citizens, especially some young and strong men, who had climbed up the city walls. There were also some retired soldiers who helped to defend the city. This was why his attack was stopped, and he couldn't succeed. This was the benefit of Yang Qindong using money to buy people. If it was said that in the beginning they were working for the 5-star army for money, then now it was for themselves. These days, whether it was those who died in battle, those who were injured, or those who were still defending the city, they had saved up a large amount of silver. Even if it was just for this money, They had to defend Turpan City well and not let the 5 allied armies come in and snatch the fruits of their victory. At this moment, in Turpan City, a group of people were cheering loudly, all of them revealing radiant and sincere smiles. Originally, they were worried that the Wala army's cannons would pose a threat to them, but when the 5-star army took out their cannons, they finally witnessed the power of cannons. They were more confident in defending the city, and naturally, they were more confident in protecting their own property. Seeing how powerful the cannons of the 5-star army were, many citizens couldn't help but suggest excitedly, "Why don't we fire these cannons into the enemy's camp? That way, we won't have to do anything and the city will be completely defended, right?" No. Hearing that someone was thinking about the cannons, Beta Persei immediately gave a decisive refusal. For him, these cannonballs were like the roots of his life. Although shooting them out now could cause chaos in the 5 countries' coalition forces and solve the crisis of the city being besieged, this was not the young master's intention. In his opinion, it should not be the right time. Since Yang Qindong didn't have this intention, how could Beta Persei make a decision on his own? Everything was still waiting for the order to be given. As the saying goes, good steel should be used on the blade. The cannons finally stopped firing. Yesen wanted to use the cannons because they were all blown up, so he couldn't use them anymore. The 5-star army deliberately held back. Yesen and the others didn't know about this. After watching the cannons being razed to the ground, he led the cavalry out of the camp and stood scattered outside the city, because he wasn't sure if the other side would bombard the barracks. If so, how could they fight this battle if they couldn't even see the shadow of the enemy's cannons? Yesen was even ready to retreat at any time, but after waiting for more than an hour, he didn't hear the sound of cannons. His originally fearful face slowly calmed down. It seems that the 5-star army doesn't have a lot of cannons. That's good. There's a possibility to continue fighting. Beta Persei regarded the cannons as his lifeblood, which caused Yesen to misunderstand. This also meant that they were destined to receive a bloody lesson soon. Without the addition of cannons on both sides, the war returned to normal, and the siege of the city continued with cold weapons. With the support of the 40,000 strong men in Turpan, it wasn't that easy for the 5 Alliance army, which didn't have much military strength, to break through. For a time, both sides fell into a deadlock. Also in a stalemate was Wala's 90,000 strong army and the 5-star army's cavalry. Bomu brought 70,000 troops and logistics to the vanguard camp. After meeting up with them, he knew everything that had happened. Regarding the fact that he couldn't break through the defensive formation of the 5-star army, nor could he rescue the 10,000 Turpan cavalrymen led by Arifu, who had tipped them off, Bomir didn't feel any guilt. This wasn't part of the battle plan, and he had no obligation to save them. On the contrary, Bomir was distressed by the loss of 6,500 cavalry in the first battle. The original Vala army was very powerful, and even the great Khan Tuachuo Buhua had fallen under their blades. But ever since Yang Qindong suddenly appeared and the 5-star army entered the grasslands, the situation immediately changed. The Wala army lost every battle they fought, and their losses were reduced. Now that they didn't even have a place to stand, wanting to replenish their manpower became an extremely extravagant matter. This was why every single fighting force in the camp was so precious. Meanwhile, just a single attack actually cost them 6,500 cavalry. This was truly something Bomur didn't expect, and it also made him understand even more clearly how terrifying the 5-star army was. Even though he had 90,000 cavalry in his hands, according to the information from the scouts, the 5-star army didn't even have 50,000 men. With the advantage in numbers, he had confidence in beating back the 5-star army in a frontal battle. However, the consequences of doing so would undoubtedly be great. The best result would be a heavy blow to the 5-star army's cavalry, making the other side lose 50,000 men. Compared to the disastrous losses he would suffer in the end, this kind of result was clearly not what Bomur wanted to see. In comparison, the 5-star army was clearly much more valiant. They had an extremely stable rear and an extremely stable source of recruits. However, losing 50,000 men wasn't a big deal at all. This was the benefit of having a strong rear. It was a pity that even though he could clearly see all of this, Yeshen just couldn't learn it. He didn't understand production at all, nor did he know how to manage the people's hearts. Even if he was given a territory, it would only give him a fixed goal. He definitely wouldn't be able to become like Yang Chendong, expanding his influence and stabilizing it. Perhaps this was the difference between them. The starting point was completely different, and it would directly lead to a completely different outcome. We can't fight head-on. After a sigh, Bomu made an extremely helpless decision. Then we just going to watch the 5-star army run wild in front of us like this? Bien Qin, who had just suffered a defeat, had an expression of unwillingness on his face. Let's wait a little longer. He didn't take the initiative to answer this question, instead choosing to evade it. Bomu wanted to report the situation here to leader Yeshen, who was at the foot of Turpan, and wait for the final result. Now that both the Yirkiang and Turpan cavalry had been defeated, it seemed like this battle was already over before it even started. However, it wasn't that there wasn't any hope. For example, there were still 80,000 Ely cavalry at the Ayla Mountain Pass. Perhaps that would become a new counterattack point. If they could deal with the surrounded 1st Cavalry Division and continue east, they could try to launch a pincer attack on both sides. It wasn't that Bomu was stupid to place his hopes on the 80,000 Ely cavalry, but it was because of the lack of information. It could be imagined that if he already knew that his allies had been defeated and had been defeated so miserably, he probably wouldn't continue to wait here. He might even turn around and flee without asking for permission from Yeshen. Bomu needed to ask for permission, and he still had a trace of hope in his heart. However, he didn't know that the 30,000 soldiers of the foreign race's 1st Army were currently rushing over from the northeast. In order to completely resolve the situation in the Ely region, Yang Chendong had adopted the method of continuously recruiting soldiers. This first batch of soldiers had already been sent over, totaling over 100,000 men. Apart from the 2nd Army, which was protecting the first batch of 300,000 civilians, the target of the 5 new armies was the besieged Turpan city, while the 1st Army's target was Yeshen's 100,000 cavalry. As a former division commander, Su Kuda had commanded over 30,000 soldiers at his peak. Compared to his current position as a commander, he wasn't much inferior. With this experience, he didn't feel uncomfortable being a commander. Instead, he quickly adapted to the role. This time, after receiving the telegram order, he hurried over as soon as he left the 8-mile city. The heavy snow also affected the marching speed of the 1st Army of the non-human kind. After the snow covered the legs of the horses, the marching speed dropped to the lowest point. Seeing that it was getting closer and closer to the time when the order was given, an anxious look flashed across the face of Commander Su Qingda. If they couldn't reach the assembly point on time, it would be tantamount to disobeying orders. At that time, could he still use the weather as an excuse? Although he was already a military commander, he was still only a senior colonel. Why was that? Wasn't it because he hadn't fought a good battle? How could he convince the masses? Chapter 1265. I don't care anymore. Increase the speed. Hurry up. Seeing that the snow showed no signs of stopping, it was only a little lighter than before. However, it was still snowing heavily. Sukuda had no choice but to order the army to increase their speed. Perhaps this was because he rarely saw heavy snow in his living environment. He couldn't find a solution in such a harsh environment. When Sensei Naganabu, the commander of the 103rd Division, took the initiative to report the situation to him, he didn't even see him. Just another commander who came to dissuade me from marching carefully. With a military order in front of me, how could I be stingy with the horses? I don't want to see them all. In the past few days, more than one person had told him that marching in such heavy snow was a great burden on the soldiers and horses. Under such circumstances, even if they reached the designated location, they wouldn't be able to launch an attack. It was better to explain the situation to Bugnam of Gojoseon and then proceed to the destination while preserving their strength. It was because of this that Sukuda didn't want to see his commander. Of course, this also had a lot to do with the prejudice in his heart. Sensei Naganabu was a citizen of the Japanese Empire. He didn't have a good impression of this race that repeatedly offended the Great Han Empire. Naturally, he wouldn't like to see them. But because of his actions, Sensei Naganabu, who came to give the suggestion, was rebuffed. Because of this, he couldn't come up with a good idea, which affected the speed of the army gathering. In the end, Walla's 100,000 cavalry managed to escape the disaster. Seeing that his commander was blocked, Sensei Naganabu could only helplessly return to his division. Living in the Japanese Empire, he was used to seeing heavy snow. Originally, he had his own method, for example, the progressive method. In other words, today one division would be in charge of the road. This was of course very hard work, but it didn't matter. The next day, another division would be in charge of the road. By repeating this, 1 day of work and 3 days of rest would be created. This way, they could create a path for the army to walk on. Their speed would also increase a lot. Sukuda didn't even want to see him. So what could he do? He wanted to use this method himself, but without a military order, his 103rd Division couldn't go past the 101st and 102nd Divisions to act as the vanguard. Otherwise, it would be a huge crime to move troops without orders. Sensei Naganabu shook his head helplessly and gave up. On the other hand, the new 5 armies that were marching towards Torpon from 8 Mile City were much faster. They were using the method that Sensei Naganabu had in mind. One army had 4 divisions, and they were advancing in a progressive manner. Although their speed was not fast enough due to the heavy snow, it was much faster than just having one division clear the way and giving each division time to rest. Commander Shi Wanshan was in the Wan-All department all year round, and it often snowed there. Naturally, he already had a plan for how to travel in the snow. Under his lead, the new 5 armies quickly approached Torpon City. Not far to the north, the 3rd and 4th divisions of the 4th Division were also running under the lead of Ling Dechang. The snow was too heavy, and Ling Dechang gave up on a bicycle in his hands. After leaving a company to guard the area, he led the rest of the Cold Vanguard warriors to advance on foot. If it was on flat ground, walking was naturally faster than a warhorse. However, under the heavy snow, it was a completely different story. Many times, a single person's speed was even faster, especially those who were able to become the Cold Vanguard warriors, which one of them didn't have good military qualifications. Their speed wasn't bad at all. Ling Dechang led more than 4,000 soldiers to change their pace. This made the Vara and Kazakh cavalry, who were in charge of following and pinning them down, extremely anxious. The heavy snow was also a huge obstacle for them. Coupled with the occasional gust of wind, they actually lost track of the Cold Vanguard warriors. The 4th Division was nowhere to be seen. Because of this, Chao Lu and Gu Lijiang, who were leading the troops, were naturally extremely anxious. After trying all sorts of methods to no avail, they had no choice but to make a decision that they were unwilling to make. That was to report the situation back. Although they would be reprimanded for doing so, this was an important matter, and they couldn't afford to play any tricks. Under the heavy snow, even the speed of the scouts and messengers was greatly affected. What these people in charge of relaying the orders didn't know was that their target, the 2nd Division, was already in front of them. Under the heavy snow, a strong gust of wind blew. In this weather where even wild beasts were unwilling to come out to look for food, there was a group of soldiers who were persevering through the snow. They held the shovels on their bodies and continued to dig. Even though the newly dug path would soon be buried by the heavy snow under the strong winds, they still worked hard to move their arms, just to create an easier path for the warriors behind them to move forward. 2nd Company has already persisted for half an hour. It's time for 3rd Company to take over. Within the group, the 3rd Company's regiment commander in charge of leading the charge shouted loudly. A group of 100 soldiers rushed forward and replaced the 2nd Company brothers in charge of clearing the path. The army continued to advance. It was with such perseverance that the 4th Division was worthy of the title Cold Front. They shook off their pursuers on both sides and approached Turpan City step by step. They came together with the new 5 armies. They reported their positions through telegrams, and Yang Qindong naturally knew all this like the back of his hand, but the 5-nation coalition was still kept in the dark. It was said that time was money. It was the same principle on the battlefield. News and intelligence had a time limit, and whoever was slower by half a beat would lose the initiative and even get beaten up. Yesen and the other generals were completely unaware of this crisis. They were still hoping that they could take Turpan City and capture Yang Qindong alive to change the situation in one fell swoop. They didn't know that the army they had sent to intercept them had been obstructed by the heavy snow and couldn't send out a warning. They had agreed to fight for 3 more days, and today was the last day. The 5-star army and Turpan citizens on the city walls were about to fall, but every time a soldier risked his life to charge up the walls, he would be beaten back down and sent flying into the dust. What the 5 armies didn't expect was that in the afternoon, a scout suddenly came from afar and told them that Yi Erqiang and Turpan's army had been defeated at the Ala Mountain Pass. Although Ili hadn't sent back the news of the 80,000 soldiers' defeat, it was enough to shake the morale of the soldiers. They couldn't remain as calm as before. "We can't fight anymore," Ili Gua and General Kagan, whose eyes were bloodshot, finally said helplessly after the sun had set. The 10,000 infantrymen he had brought with him had all been used up, and only 3,000 of his cavalry were left. The other 4 armies also suffered some losses, but they still couldn't take Turpan City. As the main attacking general, he couldn't help but admit that this path wasn't going to work. "Why don't we try another day?" In the tent of the 5 Nations army, the Kazakh representative Kalei said unwillingly. Hearing this, Kagan's eyes couldn't help but light up, but they quickly dimmed again. "We don't have enough soldiers now. Even if we can take down Turpan City, we don't have enough cavalry to guarantee that we can trap Bugnam of Gojoseon. Until now, we haven't seen a single sign of the Black Cavalry. They are Bugnam of Gojoseon's strongest force." Although Kagan didn't want to admit it, he couldn't deny the strength of the 5-star army. In fact, from the fact that they needed the 5 Nations army to fight together, it already proved the strength and terror of the 5-star army. Just like now, they had already sent out 2/3 of their forces, but they still couldn't shake the 5-star army. They didn't even have to reveal their trump cards, and the outcome of the battle was already clear. If they had to blame someone, they could only blame the 5 Nations army for not sending out all of their forces. If Ili, Turpan, and Yarkiang were willing to send out 30,000 more troops, they would have taken down Turpan City a long time ago. Even if they couldn't capture Yang Qindong alive, taking down the city and injuring him wouldn't be a problem. When people work together, Mount Tai will move. However, as an army, this sentence was like a joke. No one dared to hope that they could work together. Kagan pointed out their shortcomings, and the other representatives could only lower their heads in silence. After some time, Yesen broke the silence and said, "Don't worry, we still have a chance. This time, we forced Bugnam of Gojoseon to hide in the city and not come out. This can be considered a huge blow to his arrogance. When the next chance comes, we will definitely succeed in one fell swoop." The results of the battle were not satisfactory, and there might even be accidents. At this moment, staying outside Turpan City was an extremely dangerous thing to do. If things went wrong, they might be surrounded by the reinforcements of the 5-star army. This was not something they wanted to see. In such a situation, retreating in time was a wise decision. Their leader's words also signified the end of the encirclement of Turpan. The next step was to retreat. After a good night's rest, they would leave this troublesome place early in the morning and regroup. Soon, the tent was empty, and all the generals were preparing to retreat early in the morning. However, they didn't know that the real darkness was about to descend. In their eyes, their biggest opponent, Bugnam of Gojoseon, had already decided to launch an all-out attack tonight. When Yang Qindong made this decision, he received a telegram from the new 5-star army and the 4th Lu Division. They were already 8 miles away from Turpan City and were ready to attack at any moment. Hearing that they were here, Yang Chendong decided to launch a night attack. Chapter 1266. Launching a night attack in the heavy snow was not a wise move. However, Yang Chendong could not wait any longer. Once dawn broke and the scouts of the Five Nations Alliance discovered the new 5 armies or the 4th Army Division, the surprise of the battle would not be achieved and the effect of the attack would be greatly reduced. It was precisely because of the difficulty of a night attack in the heavy snow that Yang Chendong firmly believed that the Five Nations Alliance army would not think that he would launch a night attack. This gave him a higher chance of winning. In Turpan City, there were still 15,000 Mongolian cavalry that had gathered. There was also an army of 15,000 strong men from Turpan. The biggest benefit of the joint experience of defending the city these days was that the 5-star army had completely gained a foothold here, and they had the support of all the citizens of Turpan City. These 15,000 cavalry were the strongest force left in the city. They would launch a surprise attack with Yang Chendong and join forces with the other 2 5-star army units that had rushed over from outside the city to achieve the goal of attacking from both inside and outside. In the beginning city, Yang Chendong, dressed in a golden battle robe, was riding on a white dragon warhorse and inspecting the army. The 30,000 cavalry were ready to go. Other than the occasional snorting of the warhorses, there was no other sound. They were like a pack of wolves silently waiting for their prey to appear, waiting for the alpha to give the order to charge. A silent army would give off a strong sense of killing intent. At this moment, even Yang Chendong was shocked by the performance of these soldiers. After nearly 20 days of defending the city, those who were able to survive until now were undoubtedly much more confident in their character and skills. These people had also grown into real soldiers. "Young master, it's almost time." Beta Persei, who was at the side, was wearing a white cloak and gave off a domineering feeling. He came to Yang Chendong's side and reminded him softly, "Okay, you go." Yang Chendong nodded silently. Following his action, Beta Persei quickly left and came to the front of the 2 pitch-black mortars in front of the army. He urged the soldiers to open the wooden boxes and take out the shells. Everyone, according to the previous battle plan, gather in front of the city gate. The bombardment will begin in 20 minutes, and after 30 minutes, the entire army will attack. Yang Chendong's voice came out of his mouth, and with the help of the wind, it spread throughout the entire square. After receiving the order, the 30,000-strong army dispersed in all directions and moved towards their respective assembly points in an orderly manner. Looking at everyone's orderly appearance, the captain of the Black Cavalry Brigade, Chiu Vi, couldn't help but exclaim, "These 30,000 cavalry soldiers are already qualified soldiers. They will definitely play a greater role on the battlefield in the future." Yang Chendong naturally heard this sentence, and a smug smile appeared on his face. Who would have thought that after more than 10 days of defending the city, he would have an additional cavalry of the Mongol alliance in his hands? He had already thought about it. When he returned, he would also integrate the cavalry of Turpan into the Mongol alliance. At that time, he would have another powerful force that he could use. The war horses disappeared from the square one by one. Time passed by slowly. Finally, when the war watch's needle reached 20 minutes, Beta Persei shouted the horn to start the counterattack. Fire! Boom! 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 The 2 100mm mortars immediately let out a deep roar, and then a red light flashed in the silent night. Then there was a loud rumble that shook the earth, and the shells fell into the camp of the 5 countries that had already entered a state of rest. The sudden sound of the cannons instantly plunged several large tents into a sea of fire. Shouts, curses, reprimands, and cries for help could be heard incessantly. No one would have thought that killing intent would descend from the sky in the middle of the night. When the cannons fell one after another, there were still many soldiers of the 5 countries that didn't react. They were still staring at the sea of fire in front of them, as if they had fallen into a daze. The sound of the cannons was an order. 8 miles away from the camp, The new 5th Army and the 4th Army Division's 2 Cold Vanguard regiments immediately moved out, maintaining a constant speed as they approached Torpon. They already knew through the telegram that tonight would be a night of slaughter. "Quick, everyone get up. I'm afraid the weather is about to change." Yesen didn't sleep very deeply, and this had a lot to do with his many years of marching and fighting. At this time, his slightly aged face became very serious, and he had a very bad feeling. Kagan, who had lost his nose, had already gotten up from the tent. At this moment, his face was gloomy, and his eyes flashed with the flames of anger. It was the 5-Star Army again. This was a huge rock that had been pressing down on him since the beginning of the battle. He really didn't know when he would be able to move it away. Kazakh General Kelly was in charge of the night watch, and his soldiers were the first to gather. At this moment, he looked at Torpon with a very resolute gaze and said to the generals beside him, "Gather the troops. If there's nothing wrong, immediately retreat." This was the decision of a wise man, knowing that it was impossible but still doing it. This kind of thing basically wouldn't happen to them. If they couldn't win, then they would run. This was their way of survival. In the large tents belonging to the generals, each of them had different reactions, but it was undeniable that they all had one thing in common, and that was that their expressions were very serious. It was only 10 minutes of cannons, and it would be over very quickly. The number of soldiers that died in the explosion wasn't that many. What was needed was a kind of momentum, like the clouds of fire that appeared in the fire tent. This was the effect of the cannons. The drop in morale was the true power of the cannons. "Open the city gates, kill." Yang Qindong gave the order to charge and kill from within the city. In an instant, the 4 city gates opened from the inside, and countless cavalry charged out with sabers in their hands. At the same time, the new 5-Star Army and the 4th Lu Division's Lung Feng brothers also arrived on the battlefield. The sounds of charging and the sound of gunfire rang out incessantly, and the true attack had begun. No one had expected that on this last night, the 5-Star Army would suddenly launch an all-out counterattack. This was a kind of coincidence, but for the 5-Star Army, it was an undeniable disaster. When the sounds of killing rang out from every direction, and under the moonlight and fire, one could see a large number of black figures charging over. The 5-Star Army's camp was completely thrown into chaos. The so-called Alliance Army was originally unable to truly be of one heart and mind, and was as solid as a plate of iron. The sudden disaster really did live up to the old saying, when a disaster strikes, everyone flies away. The first to leave were the most well-prepared Kazakh cavalry. Under Kelly's lead, 50,000 cavalry rushed towards the southwest. When they left, they did not inform anyone. In Kelly's heart, this time, in the attack on Torpon City, which the 5-Star Army thought was a turtle in a jar, he had already lost 10,000 cavalry and had already fulfilled his duty. Right now, there were the figures of the 5-Star Army in all directions. Knowing that this battle was impossible to win, he naturally had nothing to say about leaving. The next to leave was Yesen. The difference was that he did not head towards the southwest, which was the rear of the Ili region. Instead, he headed towards the northwest, which was the hinterland of the 5-Star Army. Of course, he was not looking for trouble. Instead, he was going to meet up with one of his 4 generals, Bomir. After roaming the grasslands for more than a decade, Yesen deeply understood that the safest thing to do was to have military power in his hands. This was the same idea as the future where power came from the barrel of a gun. Kagan also escaped. Under the protection of his personal guards and a few Kiliarchs, he brought 1,000 soldiers and escaped. It was not that he did not want to bring more soldiers. After more than 10 days of sieging, he only had 3,000 soldiers left. In this battle, he had lost another 2,000. Being able to bring out 1,000 people was already his greatest effort. Apart from these 3 armies, the generals and soldiers sent out by Yirkiang and Torpon were a bit slower to react. However, they were only half a beat slower and were surrounded by the 5-Star Army from all directions. Some of them were even waiting for reinforcements from their allies. However, How could they know that no one told them to leave? It was just to let them stay and attract the firepower of the five-star army. Now, it seemed that they had really become scapegoats. The situation was one-sided from the start. First, the cannons attacked from afar, disrupting the defensive arrangements of the 5 allied forces. Then, the cavalry swarmed in from all directions, crushing the morale of the allied forces to the lowest point. What followed was one encirclement battle after another. Under the unfavorable conditions of insufficient troops, low morale, the encirclement battle quickly ended before noon the next day. In this battle, 13,000 soldiers of the 5-star army were wiped out and 30,000 prisoners were taken. In the end, the so-called surprise decapitation operation of the 5 allied forces ended in failure, with a loss of soldiers and a great loss of strength. When the news spread back to the various factions, they were shocked and immediately sent out envoys to Torpon City. They brought large amounts of gold, silver, and other valuables. It was obvious that they wanted to lower their heads and beg for peace. Yang Qindong did not have any intention of rejecting this. Although he never accepted peace and only accepted surrender, the weather was cold and snow was everywhere. This was very disadvantageous for the army. Taking this opportunity to reorganize the army, it was not impossible to fight again in the spring. Taking this opportunity to take some money and lower the other side's vigilance. Wasn't this a strategic strategy? Torpon City returned to its peaceful state, and the citizens of the city were beaming with joy. Not only did they survive this battle, many of them had also gained benefits. In their hearts, the name of Bugnam of Gojoseon or the Heavenly Khan had unknowingly increased. When Yang Qindong returned from the battlefield outside the city, he was welcomed by the hundreds of thousands of people in the city. Regarding this, Yang Qindong naturally waved his hand in a high-spirited manner. He would never put on airs in front of the citizens, because these were his future citizens. Even second- and third-class citizens were still citizens. Chapter 1267. Young Master, this is the will of the people. Seeing so many people spontaneously showing happy smiles on their faces, Beta Persei did not forget to flatter him. This is because we brought them more than King Hardenbarter brought them. Of course, the people will make a choice. It's just that they were born here. They can welcome me today, but in the future, they may choose to welcome others when they are given more benefits. So the migration work cannot be stopped. When the people of the provinces arrive, they will all be replaced. Yang Qindong will not easily believe others, let alone change his previous decision because of a smiling face. Since the facts have proven that the migration work is the best way to solve the internal problems, of course he will not hesitate to carry it out and will not change it at will. Yes, young master. Beta Persei quickly agreed. One of his main tasks working next to Yang Qindong was to act as an assistant. He would remember everything that was said and ordered and would instruct the specialized people to carry it out later. After agreeing, Beta Persei summarized the information he had just received. Young Master, just now the commander of the new 5th Army, Shirwan Shan, made a request. There are 100,000 Walla cavalry in the northwest and 20,000 Walla cavalry in the northeast. He wants to try to chase them all the way. Young Master, please give the order. A total of 40,000 cavalrymen were sent to stop the 4th Army Division. Among them, 20,000 were Walla and 20,000 were Kazakh. When the general counterattack was launched last night, Yesen did not escape to the southwest like the other coalition forces, but chose to go to the northwest to join Beaumir's 100,000 Iron Cavalry. Now the problem is that Yang Qindong only has a seemingly mobile new 5th Army in his hands. Their ability can only destroy one part of the enemy, so the choice must be decided by Yang Qindong. Is there a need to choose? Yang Qindong stopped and looked back at Beta Persei. Beta Persei, who didn't know what Yang Qindong meant, was a little confused, but since the young master asked, he still said tentatively, "We should choose to pursue Yesen. This is our old opponent. It's best to take this opportunity to get rid of him." Sigh. A soft sigh came from Yang Qindong's mouth. Thinking that his answer did not satisfy the young master, Beta Persei scratched the back of his head and said, "Then let's pursue the 40,000 cavalrymen. They are few in number and easy to deal with." "Well, it looks like you can't think of a good idea. Let's do it this way. The new Fifth Army will be responsible for pursuing the 40,000 cavalrymen of the coalition forces. Madsen will lead 30,000 cavalrymen to pursue the escaping Yeshen. This time, we can't let any of them go," Yang Qindong said with an extremely firm voice. In his eyes, there was no such thing as choosing one of the two. He wanted to choose both. When he heard that even the 30,000 cavalrymen under Madsen would be sent out, Beta Persei became nervous. "Young master, this way, we won't have any troops around us." Once what? Do you think the coalition forces would dare to come to Turpan at this time? Besides, it's not like we don't have any troops. Don't we still have 2,000 black cavalry and 2 regiments of cold front warriors? They're the most elite. Are you afraid that they won't be able to protect the young master? Yang Qindong knew what Beta Persei wanted to say, so he just said it directly. Yang Qindong was so decisive that Beta Persei knew that there was no room for negotiation. He immediately said, "Yes, I will give them the order according to the young master's instructions." At this time, the Five Nations coalition forces had just been defeated. They really didn't have the courage to cause trouble for Turpan at this time. In addition, whether it was the Black Cavalry or the Cold Front Warriors, they could each fight against 10 enemies. So the security around him wasn't bad. Beta Persei thought about it and found that there was no problem, so he went to pass the order. Soon, the 2 armies received the order and went to their respective targets. Northeast of Turpan, from afar, it was still covered in snow and a vast expanse of white. The cold wind blew, blowing on people's faces as if they were being cut by a knife. A large formation of cavalry was currently moving with great difficulty on this road. They were Gu Lijiang's troops who had lost their target. At this moment, Gu Lijiang's face was extremely ugly. He didn't expect that the wind and snow this time would be so heavy that he even lost his target. Now, all he could see was a vast expanse of white. Where do you want to go to find the missing 5-star army? Should he just go back like this? Gu Lijiang didn't dare. He clearly understood Kelly Ai's temperament. He was the younger brother of Aksan Janabek Khan. In the entire country and the military, he wouldn't give face to anyone except his elder brother. Many times, in order to establish his authority, he would find trouble and kill people. Not to mention that he had just committed a grave mistake. He couldn't just admit defeat like this. He had to continue looking. Maybe there was still a chance. Gu Lijiang said, then ordered to continue expanding the search area. At this moment, for his own life, his own mission, he completely ignored the soldiers in the army who had been working for 2 days without rest. The snow finally stopped, but it still continued. Under the sky, visibility was very low. It was precisely because of this that Ning Wenfeng's infantry division approached the area without being discovered. It wasn't until the other side was less than 3 miles away that both sides discovered each other at the same time. There's the 5-star army here. There's an enemy here. Almost at the same time, 2 loud shouts rang out, attracting everyone's attention and causing both sides to become excited. Ning Wenfeng was the commander of the infantry division. Although the number of soldiers under his command was the largest in the entire new 5-star army, he didn't have the help of war horses, so he couldn't move fast enough. This was his biggest disadvantage. Fortunately, the wind and snow had been blowing recently, so the war horses couldn't increase their speed. This gave the infantry an opportunity. This time, Ning Wenfeng wanted to be the first to find the enemy and obtain the first merit. For this reason, Ning Wenfeng issued a strict order to all the regimental commanders. That was, unless one of their brothers found the enemy, they absolutely couldn't retreat at will, let alone return empty-handed. Under his urging, the infantry advanced decisively and quickly, faintly leaving the other 3 cavalry divisions behind. This was the result of the snow. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It seemed that the heavens hadn't finished favoring Ning Wenfeng. Not only did it allow them to be the fastest, it also allowed them to be the first to find the target. It was as if this shout attracted the attention of all 15,000 officers of the infantry division. At the same time, Gu Lijiang was also excited. He originally thought that the target had disappeared, but he didn't expect to see it in the end. "We finally found it, huh?" Gu Lijiang looked up to the sky and laughed, thanking the heavens. But if he knew that what he found wasn't the 2 regiments of the 4th Infantry Division, but a 15,000-strong infantry division of the 5-Star Army, he wouldn't be able to smile now. Instead, he would be thinking of how to escape from this place. There weren't so many ifs in the world. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many things happening. Then, when both sides charged forward with excitement, a great battle between cavalry and infantry began. Under the snow that was half a meter high, the advantage of cavalry couldn't be fully displayed. In the end, the Kazakh cavalry gave up on their war horses and changed to fighting on foot. Adding on the fact that they hadn't rested for 2 days, their physical strength had dropped to the extreme. Just from his point of view, Gu Lijiang had already lost the initiative. Along the way, Bu Sishi's physical strength had also decreased, but compared to the Kazakh army, it was a lot better. In addition, Ning Wenfeng had promised before the battle that if they found the enemy and won the battle, he would reward them handsomely. This caused their morale to be very high. This also gave them a lot of points in the following battle. Comparing the two, from the start of the battle, the Kazakh army was at a disadvantage. After fighting in the snow for more than 8 hours, Gu Lijiang's troops were starting to show signs of not being able to defeat the enemy. It was also at this time that the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 5-Star Army arrived. Under the leadership of Division Commander Ancient River, they appeared on the battlefield like fierce tigers. This was the last straw that broke the camel's back. The Kazakh cavalry's morale finally began to show signs of collapse. In ancient times, when 2 sides fought, it was a battle of morale. Regardless of which side had this point, it was very likely that they would win. Even if they had fewer troops, there were many examples of people who won with fewer troops. No matter which side, once the morale of the troops collapsed, no matter how many soldiers there were, they would only be a motley crew. In the end, they would only be defeated. The appearance of the 1st Cavalry Division had broken the morale of Gu Lijiang's troops. The soldiers under her had either fled or surrendered. There weren't many people who were still fighting the enemy. In the next 2 hours, the Kazakh army had been destroyed. Gu Lijiang had died in battle, and the enemy had captured about 12,000 soldiers. "Come, leave 2 regiments behind to look after these prisoners. We will continue to look for the 20,000 Walla cavalry." Ning Wenfeng didn't stop just because he had obtained a victory. In his view, this was just the beginning. When Ancient River saw Ning Wenfeng's order, his eyes widened. Then he laughed heartily. "Good, Division Commander Ning. I didn't expect you to have such a valiant side. You weren't like this in the past." Ancient River was right. Although Ning Wenfeng was in charge of a portion of the military in the past, he rarely did things so decisively. Even when there was a war, he rarely went to the battlefield. He was the kind of person who could be considered a military advisor. But now, he was displaying the style of a valiant general. Ancient River couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. "Ha!" Ning Wenfeng replied with a smile. Of course, the current situation was different from the past. When he was in the Beiming army, he was just idling around. He took the responsibility of preserving his strength. As long as he didn't make any big mistakes and was willing to send money to the higher-ups, he could keep his position. But in the 5-Star Army, all the military officers were judged based on their achievements. Here, there was no need to talk about seniority or background. Everything depended on who was stronger. Chapter 1268. In the face of a situation where the capable were the top and the mediocre were the bottom, as long as one was a smart person, they should know what to do. Ning Wenfeng was originally a smart person among smart people. Naturally, he understood this point long ago and naturally knew what to do. This time, Ning Wenfeng was so desperate because he wanted to rely on military achievements to prove himself. At the same time, He wanted to prove that Yang Qindong's vision was not wrong. Their new 5 armies was an army that could fight. Just like when they were rushing to Tuliufen, even though the soldiers were very tired, none of them complained. They just wanted to prove themselves and complete the mission better. Ning Wenfeng's ambition was not small, but his luck seemed to have run out. After searching for several days, he even found the cold front company that Commander De Chong had left behind to watch the bicycle's safety. However, he did not see the figure of the Walla cavalry. In fact, he did not know that General Chao Lu had already left here with 20,000 cavalry and rushed to the place where Bomure was. Along with him was the leader of the Walla cavalry, Yisen, who was rushing from another direction. After the failure of the 5 armies to besiege Turpan City, Yisen lost confidence in this so-called allied army. This was not a united army at all. There were too many subordinates, and everyone wanted to take advantage of the situation. How could they win a battle when there were so many different voices in an army? How could they win a battle? How could they win a battle? Yesen, who could not see any hope, finally gave up all his fantasies. He decided to work alone like before. With so many elite cavalry in his hands, even if they were not a match for the 5-star army, how could he be afraid of others? At worst, he would just stay away from the 5-star army in the future. How could the world be surnamed Yang? With this goal in mind, Yesen sent someone to find Chao Lu a few days ago when Beta Persei suddenly bombarded his artillery positions. He told him not to search for the 5-star army anymore and to go straight to where Bomure was. They had to leave this place and stay away from all the forces and territories of the 5-star army. Reality proved that Yezi's thoughts were correct. When he saw the 5-star army's counterattack begin, he did not put up any resistance, nor did he have any desire to fight back. Instead, he quickly led his 15,000 cavalry out of Turpan, heading straight for where Bomure was. Originally, he had 20,000 cavalrymen with him. However, when the siege was not going well, he listened to He Kagan's words and took out 5,000 cavalrymen. He told them to give up their expertise in horsemanship and become infantrymen to siege the city. In the end, other than the 600 injured, the rest died in the siege. This made him hate He Kagan and the others even more. You deserve to lose. What kind of idiot general would give such an order to let the infantry attack the city? Yesen thought angrily. He did not think about it at all. When Keegan made this suggestion, he had raised both hands in agreement. Whether it was Yesen or Chao Lu, they were now leading their cavalry to Bomure's location as fast as possible. But they did not know that Bomure's situation was not good at this moment. At least, he was far from being in control of the situation as they thought. In terms of military strength, Bomure, who had nearly 100,000 cavalry, was undoubtedly the most powerful. But they were facing the nearly 50,000 5-star army, and all of them were elites. No one would underestimate such an opponent, nor would they dare to. The two sides faced each other like this, separated by 8 li in the wind and snow. No one moved rashly. It looked like they were evenly matched, but only Bomure knew that as the days passed, his situation would only get worse. There was only one reason, and that was that he was facing the 5-star army. This was a powerful enemy that could send reinforcements at any time. On the other hand, he already had the most cavalry. Even if Leader Yesen and General Chao Lu came here, there was a limit to how much they could increase their strength. Compared to the 5-star army who would send countless reinforcements, and compared to Yang Qindong who was so rich that no one could see his trump cards, the longer the stalemate, the more unfavorable it would be for them. Even though he clearly knew this, Bomure could not retreat. First, he had already received news from Leader Yesen telling him to wait here. He could not guarantee where he would meet up with the leader if he left now. Second, in the current situation, the two sides could still maintain the balance if they did not move. But if one side left, would the other side chase after them? If it was a direct confrontation with 100,000 cavalry, Bomure didn't fear the 5-star army that had less than 50,000 cavalry. However, if he took the initiative to leave, and the enemy began to pursue him, even he didn't dare to guarantee what would happen during the pursuit. In other words, Bomure was currently being watched and could not move. He could not guarantee that he would be able to escape unscathed. Now, all he could do was wait for Leader Yesen to appear and let him decide on the big plan. Compared to Bomir's side, the 5-star army side was also not in a good situation. Everything was because the first army did not appear on time, causing the pincer attack to be delayed again and again. In the camp, Commander Bai Shuang, who was dressed in a mighty military uniform and had the rank of senior colonel, said, "I have already reported the matter of the first army not appearing on time to teacher." His voice was firm, his expression calm. Bai Shuang's words caused the expressions of the other commanders in the tent to change. Everyone knew that the first army didn't arrive on time. For this matter, the new 5-star army commander Su Ku had personally called Commander Su He of the new 5-star army, saying that because the snow was too thick and the roads were difficult to travel on, their advance speed was greatly hindered, and they were unable to reach the designated location on time. He admitted his mistake and asked for 5 more days. He would definitely arrive on time and asked for forgiveness at that time. After receiving the contents of this telegram, Commander Suhi immediately took it out and showed it to all the commanders around him. Although he did not say anything, sometimes not saying anything represented his attitude. It meant that Suhi wanted to give face to Su Kuda. The army would wait for 5 more days before launching the attack. For a dignified army commander to admit his mistake, and with such a humble attitude, the other military commanders had no choice but to suppress their anger. After all, they were all in the same pot, and it was impossible for them not to make mistakes. Giving others a chance was the same as giving themselves a chance. However, they had never imagined that Bai Shuang would suddenly say this when Suhi called them together to discuss the military operation plan of how to launch the attack when the first alien army arrived 4 days later. Everyone was in an uproar at once. Compared to everyone else, Bai Shuang's identity was naturally very special. He was Yang Chendong's student. When others were just qualified to address Yang Chendong as the 6th young master, he was already close enough to address him as teacher. In ancient times, heaven, earth, ruler, teacher, and teacher were existences that were highly respected. Among them was his teacher. Teachers were also extremely particular about inheritance, and it also represented a closer relationship. Based on this, although he was only a commander, no one dared to look down on Bai Shuang's words. Even the only general present, Su He, was the same. This was because he was certain that as long as Bai Shuang did not make any major mistakes, with this person's age, his future achievements would definitely surpass his own. Therefore, when Bai Shuang said that he had already reported this matter to Yang Chendong through his own radio, so he did not have the slightest intention of reprimanding him. He only silently mourned for Su Kuda in his heart. "Commander Su, this time, it's not that I don't want to help you, but this matter has already been reported to the 6th young master. You are in trouble." A military meeting to discuss important matters was also stopped because of Bai Shuang's words. After all, even Bugnam of Gojoseon knew about this matter. This meant that the plan could change at any time. It was a little too early for them to discuss what would happen in a few days. Yes, Su Kuda was in trouble, and the situation had indeed changed, as everyone expected. When Yang Chendong received Bai Shuang's telegram in Tuliafan City, his eyes flashed with anger. If it was only because of the weather that they were unable to arrive at the designated location on time, Yang Chendong would not be so angry. But now, the first army of the foreign races didn't inform him about this matter. Instead, they wanted to hide it from him and inform the other armies. This was something Yang Chendong couldn't tolerate. This was deceit. It was a blatant lie. If they succeed this time, there may be similar things happening in the future. If this is not stopped, will there be a day when the military commanders below join forces to deceive him or even deal with him? Since ancient times, internal strife and even internal strife were allowed in the army, but they would never allow the loss of military power to happen. Because this is a provocation to a leader, it is a deadly threat. Inform the whole army. With anger flashing in his eyes, Yang Chendong exuded an indescribable, murderous aura from top to bottom. Yang Er, who was beside Yang Chendong, felt his entire body tremble. The rage that was being emitted from Yang Chendong's body made him feel as if he was about to lose his balance. He only felt better if his entire body kept trembling. This is the aura of a superior. Army notification. New Army Commander Su, he will be given a demerit. New Army Light Cavalry Regiment Commander Ma Xiangshan, Far Eastern Army 1st Cavalry Division Commander Dai Kwa will be given a serious warning. For divisional officers of the new army will be given a warning. 1st Army Commander Su Kuda, Yang Chendong suddenly stopped here, which made Beta Persei, who was in charge of recording, break out in a cold sweat. He knew how big of a shock this military notification would cause. I'm afraid that many people's future prospects will be greatly affected. But who knows how the main character, Suda, would deal with this. Chapter 1269. After hesitating for a moment, Yang Chendong's expression became firm again. Sukuda will be demoted to regiment commander, replacing Bai Shuang's position as regiment commander. Bai Shuang will assume the position of regiment commander. Everything will be carried out after this battle. After all, Bai Shuang was too young and didn't have any experience as a division commander. Being in charge of a regiment was very different from being in charge of an army. However, considering that Bai Shuang was the regiment commander of the 1st Cavalry Division and was already a senior colonel, it wasn't too sudden for him to take on the role of a general. As long as he made some contributions, he would be promoted. Beta Persei saw that Yang Chendong didn't have any other orders, so he went to report to Wang Shan. He could imagine what kind of influence and shock this telegram would have once it was sent to the entire army. Just as Beta Persei thought, this telegram was sent to the entire army. Any army, division, or regiment that was high enough to be equipped with a radio would soon know about it. A lot of people didn't know what happened that made Yang Chendong so angry. But as the person who knew about it, the commander of the 1st Army, Su Kuda, was completely dumbfounded. Looking at this telegram that was extremely heavy for him, he froze in place and didn't say a word for a full 15 minutes. Commander. The commander of the 301 Division, Tu Hai, didn't know what happened. He only saw that Su Kuda didn't move at all, so he carefully came up and asked, "Did Bugnam of Gojoseon have any new orders?" "Oh, you take a look. Also, don't call me commander anymore. After the army meets up with the new army, I will report to the new unit." Su Kuda smiled bitterly. After he said this, he sent the telegram to his trusted subordinate, Tu Hai. At this moment, Tu Hai was also very shocked. What did he mean by not calling him commander anymore? Did he get promoted again? That shouldn't be the case. Right now, Tu Hai was still a senior colonel. It was already very difficult for him to be a commander with this position. How could there be a better position than this? With all kinds of doubts, Tu Hai opened the telegram. When he saw the contents clearly, his expression changed drastically. After a long while, he pointed at the telegram. This. He was speechless. Suka didn't care about Tu Hai's reaction. At this time, he had already awakened from his shock. This time, he had indeed done something very wrong. He actually wanted to hide the truth from his 6th young master. This kind of action of treating military orders as child's play could be interpreted as deception. This should not be tolerated by any superior. It was already a blessing that he wasn't thrown into jail. Now, he was even given the position of regiment commander. This was giving him a chance to take the blame and perform meritorious deeds. If he gave up on himself at this time, then even the gods would not be able to save him. Right now, the most important thing to do was to make up for his mistakes and stand up again. He didn't want to disappoint the 6th young master. Commander 2, didn't Commander Mingji say that he has a way to speed up the army's advance? Now, invite him over. Before, he wanted to protect his dignity as a commander, so he suppressed the 3rd Division Commander Sensei Naganabu. Now that Suku had been taught a lesson, there was no need for him to protect his dignity. Suka suddenly woke up. After that, someone reported his performance to Yang Chendong. It was also because of this action that his life was saved. Because if he really chose to give up on himself, even the position of commander of the world's #1 army might not be his. After experiencing this incident, Sukuda had finally grown up and would have greater achievements in the future. Of course, this was all in the future. In the tent, Bai Shuang looked at the telegram and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The reason why he reported this matter to Yang Chendong was because he didn't want to do anything that would let his teacher down. He didn't expect that the position of commander would fall on his head. Although a soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier, this kind of position was not what he wanted. With his own efforts, Bai Shuang believed that one day he would be able to become a general, and that day wasn't too far away. Now, although time was saved, it was inevitable that he would be criticized. Since it was Yang Chendong's order, and it was reported to the entire army, it couldn't be changed. Since there's a heavy burden on my shoulders, I'll work hard. Bai Shuang, who knew that he couldn't change the situation, could only accept it. But now, no matter how you looked at it, his expression was like he was pretending to be obedient. Bai Shuang was pleasantly surprised. In contrast, the new army's commander, he had a worried expression. Especially when he looked at the 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Kulu, he felt even more guilty. Kulu's outstanding performance, especially when he used the strength of a single division to block the attack of 30,000 elite cavalrymen of Walla, heavily injuring the enemy in a situation where he suffered very few casualties. It was these achievements that made it a sure thing that he would be promoted to a commander. So he had already reported this to Yang Chendong and basically received his approval. He received news that the new army had already decided on the position of commander, and it was very likely that he would be the commander of the 102nd Division, second only to the 101 SD Division's commander, Lu Zhua. It seemed that after this battle, he would be promoted by 2 ranks, from a division to an army. But now, a warning had completely ruined this good opportunity. According to the rules of the 5-star army, once an officer received a warning, there was no possibility of promotion within half a year. Half a year, by that time, the new army would have been formed, which meant that Kalu lost this opportunity to improve. Facing the silent Kalu, Suhi opened and closed his mouth, then closed and opened again. In the end, he said bitterly, "Kalu, I'm sorry." This time, Kalu's mood was a bit heavy. Seeing such a fat piece of meat fly away just like that, no one would feel good about it. But it was already the truth. There was no point in blaming anyone. He could only say that he was unlucky. Thinking about how he would have to work under Suhi in the future, Kalu could only force a smile and said, "General, I'd still like to fight under your command." No one would take these words seriously. They were obviously comforting words. Suhi waved his hand and said seriously, "This time, I owe you. Don't worry. If there's an opportunity next time, I'll do my best to fight for you." "Then thank you, General, for your help." Kalu pretended to have his eyes lit up and said. But both of them knew that the position of a general wasn't easy to come by. And how could it be easy to fight for? This time, because there were 3 general positions at once, and because Kalu made a great contribution, he had the qualifications to have such a good opportunity. Next time, even if there really was a general position, there was no guarantee that it would be in the bag. Suka received the harshest criticism and demotion, but he didn't let it go. Instead, he quickly adjusted his position. Based on the principle of being in position for a minute, doing a good job for 60 seconds, he found the 303 RD Division's commander, Sensei Naganabu. After some discussion, he quickly approved of the idea of clearing snow at the front and speeding up the march. The order was quickly passed down to the entire army. Sure enough, they arrived at the designated location 3 days later. They came to the northwest of Bomu-Er's army of 100,000 and formed a pincer attack with Suhi's new army. Bomu-Er was a cautious person, otherwise he wouldn't have been chosen by Yesen to stay behind at the headquarters. In order to prevent being surrounded by the 5-star army, he sent out all of his scouts, and the furthest he sent them was 50 miles away. When the first army of the foreign races arrived, he received the news, and his expression became even more unsightly. Before, he could still use the advantage of numbers to suppress the enemy's 5-star army, but with the appearance of the 30,000 5-star army, his advantage in numbers was very small. He didn't need to fight on both sides. No matter how he looked at it, he was now in a passive position. Fortunately, he received another message that night. Tomorrow evening, the 15,000 cavalrymen led by the previous leader and the 20,000 cavalrymen led by General Chao Lu would meet up with him here. With this, they had an additional 30,000 troops, which allowed them to regain their advantage in terms of military strength. Regrettably, this good mood didn't last long. Very quickly, the scouts came back with news that the leader had personally sent over. Behind them, there were still 35,000 cavalrymen rushing over. Both sides were only a day's distance away from each other. There's still 30,000 five-star army cavalry? Where did the other 4 countries go? Bomu was naturally shocked when he heard the news. Logically speaking, the 5-star army shouldn't have so many troops in their hands, unless they were all used to deal with him. It must be like this. The 4 countries were beaten up, and with the heavy snow affecting the speed of the army, they should be holed up at home right now. In this case, didn't it mean that the 5-star army's main goal was to deal with him? When the 5 countries were together, they couldn't gain the slightest advantage, and they even lost one battle after another. Now that he had to face the 5-star army alone, Bomu didn't have the slightest chance of victory. Being afraid before the battle, this wasn't something a qualified general should do. Forcefully calming his mind, Bomu's gaze fell on the last message sent by Yesen. When his gaze fell on the words, "Only a day away," his eyes flashed with thought. "I can only stake it all. Come, call the scouts over." After thinking for a while, Bomu decided to take the risk and attack. He had to kill his way out before the 30,000 cavalry of the 5-star army arrived. Otherwise, if he was really surrounded, he wouldn't have the slightest chance of victory. Chapter 1270. After the scout reported that Bomu had given the news to Yesen, Bomu held a military meeting that very night and selected a group of 5,000 death cavalry. The so-called death cavalry referred to those who did not fear death. Because of various reasons, they made some mistakes and should be killed. Because of this, they came to the battlefield with the determination to die. And those who were not even afraid of death were the most terrifying. Not only that, Bomu also gave the defeated Qin 50,000 troops, ordering him to stop the 5-star army from the west from sending reinforcements to the 5-star army from the northeast, no matter what. If you can stop them, it will be a great merit. If you can't, you can use your death as an apology. Chang Tian is watching you. I wish you good luck. Under Bomu's serious expression, all kinds of orders were given, and the 90,000 cavalry quickly moved. At noon on the second day, they suddenly launched an attack on the first army of the non-human kind from the northeast. This sudden attack, without any warning, had indeed caught the first army off guard. Fortunately, Yang Shindong's report had just been sent out, and all the officers were very careful. Even if no one expected the Walla cavalry to attack, after a moment of panic, they still managed to stop the other party's attack. They did not immediately send out the 5,000 death cavalry, but only sent out 5,000 ordinary cavalry in order to test the strength of the 5-star army. Seeing the 5,000 cavalry quickly being pushed back, unable to move an inch, Bomu could not help but sigh. The 5-star army is really strict and not easy to deal with. After sending out his sigh, Bomu had no intention of retreating. His goal was very simple, and that was to continuously attack, causing the first army to feel fatigued. Then, when leader Yesen and General Chao Lu arrived, he would gather a large number of troops and open a bloody path. At that time, his troops would be nearly 3 times the enemy's, and charging out should not be a problem. Now, it was time to see if Qin could defend against the attack of the 5-star army from the west. Thinking about it, it shouldn't be a problem since it was 50,000 against 50,000 and they were on the defensive side. Although the snow had stopped, the thick layer of snow still became the biggest stumbling block for the cavalry. As the attacking party, they were at a great disadvantage. It was just like how Bomu's attack on the first army was not very smooth. When the new army wanted to support them, they also faced great difficulties. At the beginning of the war, Commander Su He, commander by Shuang, Commander Ma Xiangshan, Commander Dai Qua, and the others were all confused about the reason why they started a fight without any warning. They couldn't understand why the Walla cavalry would suddenly go crazy and choose to attack at this time. Fortunately, everyone was prepared to fight a big and fierce battle when they came here. Although they weren't fully mentally prepared, the soldiers were all experienced soldiers. They quickly adapted and began to charge towards the Walla cavalry camp in an orderly manner. They wanted to attack from two sides with the First Army. Even if they couldn't do it, they could at least share some of the firepower and pressure of their brother's army. However, under the heavy snow, the attack wasn't very effective, especially when facing General Qin, who was doing his best to stop them. This person had the idea of dying if he didn't succeed. He also had 50,000 cavalry in his hands. In terms of troops and chariots, he was even more powerful than Su He and the others. In a situation where they didn't have any advantage, after Commander Changbo of the new army's 4th Cavalry Division attacked, 2 regiments of cavalry were crippled. Are they crazy? It was rare to encounter such a tough battle. Commander Changbo was shocked and quickly reported the situation to the commander. At the same time, he couldn't help but reduce the frequency of the attack. If they continued to lose like this, not only would they not be able to break through, it was very likely that his entire 4th Cavalry Division would be lost here. This was something that no military commander wanted to see and wouldn't do. In the new army's tent, after Commander Changbo's report was sent here, everyone, including Su He, frowned. It was clear that they didn't understand the actions of the Walla cavalry. It looked like they were trying to break through, but it wasn't that easy to do. Although the first army of the foreign races was a newly formed army, there were many veterans among them. Furthermore, the roads were passable, and the snow was too thick, so it would not be easy for them to charge out. It was very likely that they would suffer heavy casualties and fail to achieve their goal. They could see this logic, and so could the Walla's general. But why did they still do this? The tent was abnormally quiet for a while. After a full 15 minutes, everyone still couldn't find the slightest clue. No one said a word. In the end, it was Bai Shuang who spoke. Okay, I see that everyone can't think of a reason like me. Let's report it to the teacher. Report it? Su He raised his eyebrows after hearing this. It wasn't that he didn't think of doing this, but wouldn't that prove his incompetence? He had just been executed. But when he thought of this kind of battle, if a mistake in judgment led to even greater losses, the result was not something he could bear. Besides, who was Bai Shuang? Even if he didn't agree, he had a separate radio in his hands that could contact Yang Qindong. If that happened, he would only be more passive. Okay, then let's report it. Let's ask the 6th young master to give us a clear path. After thinking about it, Su He decided to accept Bai Shuang's suggestion. The telegram was quickly drafted. After the commanders read it and found no problems, they reported it through the radio. After a stick of incense's time, a reply came. Compared to Su He and Bai Shuang, who only focused on one army in one area, Yang Qindong looked at the entire situation. Although he didn't know about the 20,000 cavalry led by Chao Lu, he knew that Yesen led 15,000 elite cavalry to meet up with General Beaumier. With Yang Qindong's intelligence, he naturally realized that Beaumier was preparing to break out of the encirclement. At the same time, it was to prevent the 30,000 cavalry led by Na Ri Song from pressuring them enough to find a way out. After all, once Na Ri Song's 30,000 cavalry arrived, they wouldn't have any advantage in terms of numbers. This was an opportunity to make the Walla army stay, but it wasn't a good opportunity. Even a cornered beast would fight, let alone 100,000 Walla elite cavalry. Once they went crazy, coupled with the snow, the various troops might not be able to reach the designated location on time to provide reinforcements. In this way, there would be too many uncertainties in the war. After thinking about it, Yang Qindong didn't give the order to fight to the death. Instead, he pointed out the Walla army's movements and allowed the various troops to deal with it as they saw fit without losing too much of their combat strength. Dealing with it as they saw fit was equivalent to handing over the command to the various commanders. This was also Yang Qindong's way of commanding. As the military strength of his subordinates continued to expand, Yang Qindong could no longer do everything by himself like before. Therefore, it was necessary to delegate power appropriately, especially to those commanders who rushed to the front lines. They were better able to direct the movements of the battle. Sometimes, opportunities were fleeting, and if they weren't grasped in time, there might be problems. Yang Qindong had been practicing for many years and understood how to use people. It was precisely because of Yu Qian that he didn't have to worry about Qiqian City and didn't need to be distracted. Similarly, it was because of the existence of Tiger's Mane that he was like a nail nailed into Shiwan City. As a result, his influence and power were growing. To put it simply, the way to use people was to learn to use people and learn to trust people, and not to give orders in every aspect. It was like Zhuge Liang who did everything by himself. In the end, he was exhausted to death, and without his subordinates, he immediately lost his drive and ability to command. Old Jiang was the same, constantly giving orders from the back, causing the battle plan to change again and again. Loopholes appeared frequently, and the army was defeated in the end. With these precedents as an example, how could Yang Qindong follow in his footsteps? When the telegram was sent to them, the eyes of the commanders in the tent lit up after they read it. This discretion was very significant. Handing over the command to them was a form of trust, but how could it not be a heavy responsibility? Everyone, you have seen the telegram. The Walla cavalry will suddenly launch an attack, saying that they are preparing to kill their way out. Now, their leader, Yeshen, is also moving here. Then, should we completely keep them here, or should we let them live to prevent both sides from suffering losses? Let's discuss this matter. Su He, as the general with the highest military rank and the highest rank, was naturally the best choice to preside over the meeting. As soon as his voice fell, the commanders looked at each other, not knowing what to do. From a psychological point of view, after fighting with the Walla army for so long, of course they wanted to completely keep them here to prevent future troubles. But now was really not a good time. The snow was too thick, and it greatly affected the movement speed of the army. Moreover, the other party's military strength was not ordinary, and their combat strength was quite strong. If they were to fight head-on, not to mention that they might not be able to keep their lives, their losses would definitely not be small. Yang Qindong had already sent out a notice to the entire army. After this battle, they had to take a break. While the army rested and replenished, the migration of the civilians also had to be carried out. They would only attack the Ili region after the snow melted in spring. And if everyone suffered heavy losses now, it would delay the important matters after spring. What should they do? Among the commanders, there were very quickly two opinions. Some people said that they should use this opportunity to completely eliminate Yeshen. This was a great enemy that the five-star army rarely faced. If they were eliminated, the five-star army would no longer have any opponents in this grassland. From a long-term perspective, this was appropriate. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.